Warning, this program is entirely fictional and made by a sole Canadian man. All characters and events in the show, including the host, even those that are based on real people, are entirely fictional. The following program contains mature subject matter. Viewer discretion is advised.
America. The land of opportunity. Fueled by immigration and innovation, with just a touch of authoritarian despotism. Here in these glorious United States, there exists a vast criminal underground, stretching from sea to shining sea. And if you look closely at our utopian American settlements, you may just find the stain of criminal activity in more places than you ever thought possible. Tonight, on Grand Theft Auto Geographies. Dirty deals, promiscuous activity, and heavy crime. Tonight we will be examining a district of Liberty City where rules are optional. A neighborhood so heavily polluted by crime and corruption that even most police officers avoid it like an awkward acquaintance. So notorious is the seedy atmosphere of this area that even its name directly evokes the illicit nature of its daily dealings, barely hidden from the public eye. The Red Light District. Picture a dingy, crime-ridden, and debaucherous neighborhood. The Red Light District of Liberty City circa 2000 was one such place, and populating its narrow, claustrophobic streets were a variety of illicit establishments, crumbling residential infrastructure, and occasional views of the better parts of town, obstructed by Portland Island's distinct elevated rail network. Like many neighborhoods in Liberty City around this time, the district is quite small, and is heavily populated by businesses directly or indirectly linked to some form of criminal activity, often of the organized variety. Pimps, pushers, prostitutes, and all other manner of LC's underground roam the streets of Red Light near day and night, though their activity is known to increase when the sun goes down. While most of the area is known primarily for its unsavory individuals and businesses, the western and eastern edges of the district are distinctly more calm and typical, with the western half of Red Light looking out over the river towards Staunton Island, and mostly consisting of low-cost, high-density residential buildings. And the eastern edge bordering the St. Mark's district, consisting of several large buildings, mostly a mix of residential and commercial plots. A central road runs along the district, going north into Hepburn Heights and ending south in front of the Meowch Sex Kitten Club. This most prominent road contains the area's most iconic landmarks, such as Luigi's Sex Club 7, formerly Polly's Review Bar, and infamous criminal fixer company Pay and Spray, with several smaller streets branching off of this primary stretch with smaller commercial plots. 4 other main roads run through the district: an avenue along the western riverfront, an avenue on the eastern edge bordering several other districts, a second central road that runs perpendicular to the first and adjoins the 2 avenues, and another long road containing few businesses and primarily serving as a connection to Hepburn Heights, which the district borders to the north, with St. Mark's to the east, Chinatown to the south, and the riverfront to the west. The full and detailed history of Liberty City is difficult to ascertain. Due to numerous incompetent bureaucrats and meddling politicians throughout the years, we can only start to piece together indisputable facts about the city and its neighborhoods, starting in the late 1990s. In the mid-90s, the district was under the control of the Sindaco Mafia family, and likely had been for many years prior. By 1998, during the rise of the Leone family, due in large part to the actions of the future capo regime Tony Cipriani, the district would see a full-scale gang war between the Leone and Sindaco families, with open gunfire being exchanged by Mafia soldiers in the streets of Red Light on several occasions. The war escalated to such heights that a building, the Sindaco-controlled Doll's House, brothel, and gambling den, was bombed and destroyed, further adding to the chaos the district had become known for. Following the Sindaco family eradication during the Mafia Wars of '98, the district would fall squarely under the control of the Leone family, with its most prominent attraction, the famous Polly's Review Bar, becoming the also famous Luigi's Sex Club 7, providing services to Liberty City's most unsavory customers ever since. In 2000, the district would again become a safe haven for criminal duo Mike and Vinny, who operated out of Red Light for presumably the Leone family. Following Vinny's supposed death, Mike would also begin working for a man known as Johnny the Bartender, for whom Mike bombed and destroyed an upstart bar in the district, the Diamond Sky. By 2001, the district, still under the control of the Leones, would see more notoriety and violence when escaped bank robber Claude took safe haven in the area with Leone associate 8-Ball, before later being betrayed and raining further chaos down on the neighborhood when Claude assassinated Salvatore Leone as he was leaving Luigi's club. Since the downfall of Salvatore, it is unknown if the Leones remained in control of the territory, though it's suspected that they did, under presumably new leadership. Many businesses line the streets of Red Light, and many of them represent some of the more fringe and dangerous elements of American life. The businesses in the district circa 2001 are $10 Steps, Ammunition, Big Al's Liquor, Cafe Metropolitan, Capitali, Cheap Thrills, Citibank, Classic Nails, Dry Cleaning, Eddie's, Executive Relief, Fellows, Fluffy Pillows, Freeman Coated Fabric Corporation, Handpen, Luigi's Sex Club 7, Meowch Sex Kitten Club, Oily Johnny's Massage Parlor, Pay and Spray, Peepland, Roadway Foods, The Rush Construction Company, Semtex Electronics, Tattoos and Body Piercings, Short Stay Hotel, The Body Shop, The Bowler's Fist, The Glenwood Drugstore, Woody's Topless Bar, Triple X Mags, Video, and Yo Ma's Frozen Fishy Finger Factory. Okay, now for this section I have no choice but to temporarily drop the kayfabe. I am not a worldly man, at least not yet, so please take this information with a grain of salt. According to the wonderful GTA wikis, the red light district of the 3D era Liberty City is based on primarily the block of Baltimore during the 1970s, and parts of 42nd Street in New York, particularly at 42nd and Broadway during the 70s, when Times Square was a seedy and dark and often dangerous part of town, filled with porn shops and stalls and brothels, among other marginalized elements of American society considered dirty. Now, looking at parts of Baltimore especially, you could definitely see the influence, and despite the GTA equivalent of Times Square being on Staunton Island and not on Portland, you can definitely see the influence of 42nd and Broadway as well. Especially in places like Luigi's, with their overhanging, bombastic, and in-your-face neon signage. Now, just like the game version, these neighborhoods were mostly mixed zoning, with commercial businesses lining the streets and residential apartments above them. And while GTA 3 isn't set in the 70s, the aesthetic of that era was very evidently carried over from the past, as both the block and 42nd and Broadway had gentrified and eliminated many elements of the so-called unsavory businesses over the course of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Sloping terrain, trigger-happy trigger men, and fresh pizza. Tonight we will be taking a look at a district of Liberty City where the Italian flag flies proudly. A neighborhood so saturated with mobsters and third-generation immigrants that even Las Venturas would be impressed. So iconic and important is the atmosphere of this area to its residents that it remains tightly controlled by those folks from the old country who are responsible for its name, the St. Mark's District. The Italians are a notoriously proud group of Americans, and that fact is most prominently demonstrated in the sloped streets of the St. Mark's District, with its endless stream of Italian restaurants, flags, and roaming mafia soldiers. If there's one thing the people immediately associate with the district, it would probably be La Cosa Nostra, the mob. As pockmarked throughout the area are numerous businesses and homes, all owned in whole or in part by primarily the Leone family, though the district has been home to several other mafia families. St. Mark's, being home to several large organized crime outfits, is fairly large as far as typical Liberty City districts go from this time, comprised of a large mix of residential and commercial buildings, and even a few large skyscrapers. As the name implies, most of the residents of this district are of Italian-American descent, and those that are not are unwillingly beholden to the powers who control the streets, with the city at different times being home to the Sindaco, Forelli, and Leone crime families throughout its history. The western half of the district is much flatter and consists of mainly a mix of residential buildings with commercial businesses lining some of the streets, as well as famous landmark and notorious Leone front, Mama's Restaurante, while the eastern half of the district features the aforementioned incline with sloped terraces being particularly prominent, as well as the world-famous Marco's Bistro, which was at one point a Forelli family asset, but in modern times is speculated to be a Leone front. The northern part of the district also cuts into parts of Harwood scrapyard, and according to our research, actually includes parts of what many consider to be Harwood, including Capital Autos, the Amco gas station, and part of the fire station, though it remains in contention as to exactly where the dividing line is between the two districts. The most striking part of St. Mark's is its uncharacteristic rise in altitude from the west to the east side, with the district primarily composed of one large avenue which runs from the lower west end to its highest point in the east, before sloping down again in the north to connect back with Hepburn Heights. There is also a large avenue which connects the lower western end of the district with the higher eastern edge, and several smaller roads crisscrossing between these large avenues. The district borders Harwood to the north, Hepburn Heights and the Red Light District to the west, as well as a small part of Chinatown, Portland View to the south, and Portland Beach to the east. Being heavily associated with the Mafia, the St. Mark's district has a rich and violent past. In the 1980s, the district was controlled by the Forelli crime family under Sonny Forelli, and it may have even remained that way as late as the late 1990s, with the Mafia turf war seeing the Leones take control of almost all formerly Forelli-owned businesses. Even before the war, however, the area was no stranger to bloody battles, with a particularly famous shootout taking place in the winter of 1992 at the aforementioned Marco's Bistro, while it was still under Forelli control, which saw a Leone assassin, at least at the time, Carl Johnson, murder the then head of the Forelli crime family, Marco Forelli, brother to Sonny, who had taken over for the family following Sonny's death in 1986 to Florida kingpin Tommy Vercetti.
I just wanted to piss you off before I kill you.
By 1998, the Forellis were the smallest family in St. Mark's, with the Leones also having seen better days, and the Sindacos at the height of their power, when a turf war was ignited by meddling from the Sicilian mob. During this turf war, a Leone-controlled casino was almost bombed and destroyed, but many of the families in the area saw fit to export their violence to other parts of the city, or even other parts of the country, or other countries entirely, attempting to keep bloodshed in the streets to a minimum when possible. However, like any other part of Liberty City, violence was almost always inevitable, and even at one of its most popular tourist destinations, Mama's Restaurante, a full-scale shootout was never out of the question. During the rise of future capo regime Tony Cipriani, Tony's own mother would become so infuriated with his performance as a mafioso that she would order a hit-out on her own son, and a deadly firefight would ensue. Following the efforts of Tony in the Mafia Wars, the district would completely fall under the control of the Leones, including, most likely, the famous Marco's Bistro, and may even remain that way to this day, seeing as even following the death of Don Salvatore Leone, the district remained heavily controlled and populated by the Italians. The area has also seen minor construction over the years, but some buildings, particularly on the north side, were completely demolished and replaced by 2001, including a one-time safe house of Tony, which when our reporters last investigated, was a pile of rubble. As we've mentioned previously, the St. Mark's district is heavily Italian-American, and reflecting that, most of the businesses in the area are appropriately Italian themselves. Businesses that have appeared in the district between 1998 and 2001 are 1 Hour Photo, Amco Gas Station, Barbarism, Bellamissimo, Bobella, Bruno's Fresh Mozzarella and Pasta, Capital Autos, Carosello Italiano, Fabric 8, The Leone Casino, Liquor, Marco's Bistro, Mama's Restaurante, Page 3 Bookstore, Panettiere, Pizza, Signora Grande, and Surplice to Requirements. Contrary to popular belief, the Leone's primary headquarters, Salvatore's Gentlemen's Club, is not actually located in St. Mark's, but rather in the neighboring Portland Beach. And as we've mentioned before, there are those who contend that the true northern border of the district excludes Capital Autos or the Amco gas station from even being considered part of the area. Okay guys, once again dropping the kayfabe, and I want to give a special shout out to all of the GTA wikis, without which these sections would be incredibly difficult. Now the St. Mark's district is very evidently based on Little Italy, Manhattan, with St. Mark being the patron saint of Venice and the origin of the area's name. As is most evidenced by the district's steep incline, Little Italy is clearly not its only inspiration. According to the wonderful GTA wiki, Brooklyn neighborhoods like Carroll Gardens, Bushwick, and Prospect Heights, among possibly others, also inspire St. Mark's. Unlike the real Little Italy, and probably due to in-game limitations at the time, the district does not feature numerous stalls or other sidewalk-friendly activities that are more commonly seen in the New York equivalent. But its building design is very clearly reminiscent of the main inspiration. Looking at parts of the real-world Carroll Gardens and Bushwick, you can definitely see the resemblance, especially in the elaborate Italian restaurants that places like Marco's and Mama's are based on. As mentioned though, it is very strange that the district has this very steep incline that goes from one end to the other, as this is a feature more seen in cities like San Francisco in the real world, and not in New York, especially not in Brooklyn. Blood, business, and brine. Tonight we will look at a district of Liberty City caked in death, conflict, and Americanized cultural landmarks. A district strongly linked to the organized crime of Asian gangsters, which saw its native inhabitants slowly rise out from under the control of others to establish their own comfortable slice of the American dream, only to find that the reality was much tackier, dangerous, and beyond their grasp. A place so influenced by the makeup of its residents that its name became one used for similar neighborhoods all across the United States. Liberty City's Chinatown. Similar to the Italian-dominated St. Mark's district, which borders it at a small intersection to the east, Liberty City's Chinatown is populated by predominantly Chinese immigrants, though the racist American tendency to group all Asians together as Chinese likely means that the district was popular in general among Asian Americans, who found fewer language and cultural barriers when perusing the district's open markets and shops. The district is one of the largest in Liberty City, and is characterized by narrow streets lined with shops and residential units above them, as well as the occasional recreation, such as the basketball court on the district's southern edge. Some historians claim that the Chinatown aesthetic originated here in Liberty City, with its predominantly urban American design for the buildings and exaggerated stereotypical Asian architecture adorning different parts of the neighborhood, despite most of them not actually being of Asian origin. Many of the buildings and shops in Chinatown have their names written in Asian languages, or both English and another language, to accommodate the mostly Asian language-speaking demographic of the district. The district's western edge is bordered by the river and features one of the elevated rail stations servicing Portland, allowing many of the district's residents to work in other parts of the city while commuting back to their homes later. It is also, like much of the district, heavily dominated by commercial businesses on the streets, while the eastern edge is dominated by yet more businesses running along one of its main avenues, including the famous Punk Noodles. Unlike some other districts, Chinatown's streets are a jumbled grid, composed of 4 main avenues, 2 running north to south, and 2 running east to west, with one of the former being the Riverside Avenue running underneath the L train. There are also the shorter avenues surrounding Raffles Fish Factory, which offer additional access to shops and the factory itself. Many other smaller streets branch off of these larger roads, and throughout the district, zoning is nearly uniform, with residents living above the many businesses lining almost every street. Perhaps owing to the fact that the district was considered undesirable by many of the non-Asian residents of Liberty City, the district itself was often grimy, dark, and poorly policed, with the Liberty City Triads often serving as the de facto rulers of the neighborhood through most of its history, following the gang wars that weakened the city's mafia in the late 1990s. When exactly Chinatown was established and became the district that it is today is unclear, but according to our research, the district has changed very little since its inception, continuing to be molded by the people who inhabit it with little influence from the rest of the city, who looked on in disdain. At some point, the criminal organizations in Chinatown would come together to form the Liberty City Triads and attempt to establish control of the neighborhood's territory, but be overpowered by the growing influence of the many Liberty City Mafia families, most predominantly the Leones.
Stay off Leone Tarp, asshole!
By the 1990s, much of the district had fallen under Mafia control, when the Sicilian Mafia arrived in Liberty City to try smoking out the three main crime families already running the city. The Triads would receive their first break when the Sicilians helped arm them to fight off their rivals and further hamper Leone business. By 2001, the district was almost completely under the control of the Triads, though the Leones still had some business in the area that the Triads allowed. This wouldn't last long, however, as a war would be stoked by Leone capo regime Tony Cipriani, with help from their new operator, Claude, who worked to dismantle Triad assets and cause chaos, during which time the district saw some of the most violence in the area's history, with the open murder of Chunky Lee Chung at the market, and eventually the death of several Triad warlords at Claude's hands, ending the war and placing much of Chinatown back under Leone control once again. Though the Leones were now moving drugs and other products through the district freely, the area remained heavily populated, patrolled, and guarded by Triad soldiers and not Mafia wise guys. Today, it is unknown if the Triads maintained control of Chinatown, as following the death of Salvatore Leone, it is presumed his second-in-command, Tony Cipriani, took control of the family, and given Cipriani's own history with the Triads, it seems entirely likely that he pushed for further and continued control over the district and its illicit dealings. As we've mentioned several times now, Chinatown had many businesses, perhaps more on average than any other district of Portland. The reasons for this are unknown and we can only speculate, but what is known is that numerous establishments have lined the narrow streets of Chinatown throughout the years, and the vast majority of them have catered either directly to Asian Americans or to tourists looking for a brief and voyeuristic glimpse at a foreign and supposedly exotic culture, almost entirely manufactured by Asian-born but very much American people. Some of the businesses we know of in the district between 1998 and 2001 are Bistro, Authentic Seafood Company, Bank of Liberty, Birthday Suit, Bruns, Chinese Groceries Delicatessen, Chinese Restaurant Noodle House, Clench, Cut, Deli, Deli and Pizza, Delicatessen Minimart, Far East Laundrette, Fresh Seafood Market, Giovanni's Deli, Gourmet Deli, H&W Seafood Company, Hardware and Floor Specialist, Helmut Xiang, Kylie's Hot Sauce Company, Liberty Bagel Deli, Live Lobster Crab and Seafoods, Margot Bistro Cafe, Meilin Construction Company, Mr. Wong's Laundrette, New Hong Huang Inc., New Liberty Fashion, Outdoor Indoor Clothes, Old School Hall, Papa's 12-inch, Pizza, Punk Noodles, Raffles Fish Factory, Roast Peking Duck, Samo's Walk, Scumdark, Sunshine Plumbing Distribution, Thumbco Trading Inc., Tingfu Garden, Video, and Wing Sung. As we said, Chinatown is large and busy, with many restaurants, laundromats, clothing stores, and all manner of shops dotted across its map. If you should ever visit Chinatown yourself, try stopping by the Central Open Market and purchase some authentically American Chinese food, straight from the minds of capitalists to your veins. Okay guys, dropping the kayfabe. Now, Chinatown Liberty City is, for anyone who doesn't already know, based on the Chinatown of Brooklyn, New York, which, while not being the earliest example of the Chinatown archetype, is nonetheless one of the more famous and distinct examples of this uniquely American phenomena. Just like real-world Chinatowns, the district features a pair of vaguely Chinese arches, which are inventions of capitalism to appeal to American consumers, rather than an actual cultural symbol hailing from the Far East. Also, like many real Chinatowns, including Brooklyn's, the streets are mostly narrow and packed with many small businesses, and very few exclusively residential units. Looking at the two one after another, it is very clear where Rockstar drew their inspirations from when building the neighborhood, from the boxier layout of the streets to the signage, and even the area's demographic. The entire district oozes that distinctly American interpretation of Asian cultures, especially in the names of its businesses, which continue that trademark Rockstar brand of lowbrow humor. Industry, murder, and dog food involving murder. Tonight we will examine a district of Liberty City which many often overlook, A relatively small but impactful region of Portland Island, which has served as the hub to mafia-connected mechanics and a refuge for some of the most horrific murders committed in Liberty City history. A neighborhood so dominated by the whir of metal on metal and the grinding of the commercial gears that many have forgotten its bloody history, but whose influence on the rest of the city and importance to its continued existence have kept it relevant throughout the decades. Trenton. Being incredibly close to both the Portland Harbor and the docks in Atlantic Key, Trenton serves as both Portland's, and to a larger extent, much of Liberty City's industrial heart, and is primarily characterized by the presence of many commercial and industrial businesses who import raw materials from the districts nearby for manufacturing or distribution. It is also home to one of the city's cab depots and the city's primary bus terminal for arrivals from out of state. The district itself is quite small and consists of two primary avenues which cross and loop around the district's southern edge, and two closed-off blocks containing many of the area's businesses near the district's northern edge. Despite its size, Trenton is one of the most integral areas of Portland, connecting to many other districts due to its central placement on the island. Due to having mostly low density and single-story buildings, the skyline of Trenton from all angles is dominated by views from other areas of the city, with much of Staunton visible beyond Callahan Bridge to the west, much of Portland View visible to the north thanks to the open park, and the taller warehouses and cranes of the city's harbor district visible to the east. It also features some greenery scattered around the area along the waterline and the district's border with Portland View, which is to the north, with Portland Harbor to the east, Atlantic Key to the south, and Callahan Point, Bridge, and Chinatown all to the west. While many assume the history of Trenton to be mundane, being a rather simplistic industrial zone, the reality could not be further from the truth. Trenton over the years has borne witness to some of the most unspeakable crimes committed in the entire history of Portland, and possibly all of Liberty City, with at least one man, possibly more, being butchered to death in the district's lumber mill in 1998, and numerous disappearances eventually uncovered to also be murders taking place just 3 years later at the Bitchin' Dog Food Factory. In '98, Tony Cipriani of the Leone crime family would lure Giovanni Kahsha to the lumberyard and proceed to chop him up into tiny Italian sausages, which were rumored to have been sold at Kahsha's own delicatessen in the Chinatown district.
There's loads of meat back here. Tasty.
As if to continue the trend of butchery, in 2001, owner of the local dog food factory, Marty Chonks, would, with the help of the Reaper Man known as Claude, lure at least 4 individuals to his factory, where they were then reportedly murdered and chopped up, only to be stuffed into cans of dog food and sold to unsuspecting pet owners across the country.
Stop!
In addition to the horrible butchery that has taken place in the area, it has also served as tertiary mafia territory, due to the presence of Joey Leone, son of Leone family Don, Salvatore Leone, and his seemingly legitimate garage, which operated in the district at least as early as 1992. Leone himself would contract the murder of several individuals while operating out of his garage, and also, frequently and illegally, chop up vehicles for further profit, though it is unknown if Joey's presence in the area was entirely independent, or if the Leones actively monitored the district to maintain their territory. The former seems more likely, as in 2000 we were able to confirm that, oddly enough, the Shoreside Vale-based gang, the Southside Hoods, under D-Ice, apparently controlled the area, at least partially, and may have even briefly fought with the Mafia-allied foot soldiers Mike and Vinny, who are speculated to have worked for the Leone family in and around the year 2000. As we've said, Trenton is primarily an industrial neighborhood, and as such, business in the area reflects that. Some of the businesses in the area between 1998 and 2001 are Amco HQ, Bitchin' Dog Food, Bolt Burgers, Burke Supply Company, Don Kiddick's Sausage Factory, King Nuts, Joey's Auto Painting, Liberty City Sawmills, Liberty Pharmaceuticals, Mean Street Taxis, Naean Zen Dojo, Trenton Bus Depot. While not packed to the brim with businesses like the Red Light District or Chinatown, Trenton makes up for it with the size and scope of its clientele, with companies such as the international conglomerate Amco even having their HQ in the area, as well as Liberty Pharmaceuticals. Trenton may not be big, but its relevance packs a mean punch. Okay guys, once again breaking character to look at the real-world neighborhood which inspired Trenton, and according to my research and the wonderful GTA wiki, it appears to be Red Hook, Brooklyn. and more specifically the industrial zone of Red Hook. Unlike the real-world counterpart, Trenton features no residential zoning whatsoever, and more closely resembles the parts of Red Hook which are almost exclusively factories and businesses as well. Perhaps due to a lack of time or ability with the scope of the original Liberty City, Trenton's inspiration is one of the more tenuous we've seen so far, with it also possibly taking general inspiration from typical American industrial zones in other major cities, such as Detroit and Cleveland. Also, unlike the real-world Red Hook, Trenton does not feature its own access to the waterways of Liberty City, with the neighboring Portland Harbor also clearly taking some inspiration from Red Hook's Erie Basin, which I think heavily inspired parts of the Portland shoreline. In this way, Trenton is somewhat unique as far as 3D-era Liberty City standards go, with a lot more liberties, pun intended, taken with its placement and purpose on the island, compared to its real-world counterpart. Either way, it serves as the perfect setting for the morbid task of delivering multiple victims to get turned into dog food, or working for the smooth-talking Italian man who loves cars and women. Parties, mobsters, and massacres. Tonight we will take a look at a very small district of Liberty City with a very big secret, and the history of bloodshed which many to this day remain ignorant of. We will see sleazy wise guys, illicit substances, and bitter rivalries unfold as we examine every nook and cranny of this seemingly innocuous district of a city with no shortage of violent criminal stories. A neighborhood so overlooked that many forget it isn't part of a neighboring district in every direction, but whose own distinctive history fits perfectly in the grim gallery of America's bloodied and shady past, Atlantic Keys. Atlantic Keys is small, the second smallest district technically speaking after the nearby Callahan Bridge district, which many consider an informal designation to begin with, effectively making the Keys the true smallest neighborhood in Portland and possibly all of Liberty City. The area is characterized by several small docks, mostly for smaller vessels, and serves an almost identical purpose to the neighboring Portland Harbor district, but on a much smaller scale. The only other notable features of this district are several warehouses, which we will cover in just a moment, and the single U-shaped road that all the businesses in the area connect to, which loops down from Trenton on the district's eastern and western edges. The Keys borders part of Trenton and Portland Harbor to the north, and Callahan Point to the west. As we've alluded to, Atlantic Keys has seen a disproportionately large amount of violence over the years for its small size, and while we can't say for certain just how far back the area's violent history extends, the worst of it appears to have occurred around the late 1990s and early 2000s, and almost exclusively revolved around mafia activity in Portland from several different families. In 1998, the area would be a territory of the Leone crime family, and future capo regime Tony Cipriani would serve briefly under Leone associate Vincenzo Chile, who ran the neighborhood for the Leones at least between 1994 and 1998. When tensions between Chile and Tony reached a boiling point, Vincenzo would use a ship docked at one of the district's docks to try and lure Tony into a trap where he is ambushed by dozens of men loyal to Vinny, wielding chainsaws. Tony would manage to kill all of the attackers though, and soon after kill Vincenzo as well. But the legacy of the event would live on and become known locally as the Portland Chainsaw Massacre, though due to the mafia's involvement and a lack of police reporting, many remain skeptical as to the truth of the accepted narrative, if it even happened to begin with. Whether or not the massacre was real, it would inspire a brutal and highly illegal underground fighting tournament called Slash TV aboard the same vessel, and while the phenomenon was reportedly discontinued as early as the following year, it remains a conversation piece for many of Portland's older residents who still recall the rumors. In 2000, a Banshee sports car was stolen from the area, which is only noteworthy for the person who stole it, presumed Leone associate Mike, who would go on to cause chaos for the city throughout the year, before fleeing by plane to Colombia later on. In 2001, the area would once again be adjacent to violence, at least according to some, when the notorious and deadly Reaper man known as Claude dumped a body for serial killer Marty Chonks at the docks, though this could not be confirmed with 100% certainty. What is confirmed, though, is that also in 2001, the area was host to several bombastic parties hosted at Warehouse Rave, and a subsequent LCPD bust, as well as the murder of several Ferrelli family soldiers who are presumed to have owned the last unknown warehouse in the area, when the Reaper man Claude, working for El Burro of the Diablos, lured several men to their death with the jingly-jangly of a Mr. Whoopi's ice cream van loaded with explosives. The businesses in Atlantic Keys are few and far between, to say the least. In the district's history, it has never had more than 5 warehouses, which have served several purposes over the years, mostly as fronts for the city's various mafia families, likely running drugs from the district's docks. The area was home to Vincenzo Chile's operation in 1998, as well as briefly hosting the illegal Slash TV games, and by 2001 was presumably controlled in part by the Forelli brothers, on top of containing the aforementioned warehouse Rave and a last unknown warehouse. Alright guys, so once again dropping character, Atlantic Keys is, according to the GTA Wiki and my own research, based very loosely on the Dumbo area of New York, or down under Manhattan Bridge overpass. But unlike the HD version of Liberty City's equivalent neighborhood, Boabo, it doesn't actually feature the overpass of a bridge looming over the area. For these reasons, parts of the neighboring Callahan Point end up being closer to the aesthetics of the real-world Dumbo, but the inspiration is still clearly visible in the docks and smaller warehouses lining the district's edge. Given this, there isn't a whole lot to say about Atlantic Keys when comparing it to Dumbo, as the area is far too small and far too underdeveloped to offer much in the way of direct comparison. Atlantic Keys is certainly an example of an early neighborhood in Rockstar's then new 3D worlds getting the short end of the stick. Civic service, executions, and butchery. Tonight we will examine a district of Liberty City that might otherwise have gone overlooked, if not for its particularly bloody history, even among the many crime-ridden neighborhoods of Portland and beyond. We will examine a district infamous for its violence and little else, a place many average citizens tend to forget, and how that fact helped shape the area into the perfect place for all manner of America's most horrifying and shady criminal actors. A place so entangled in the history of its city's dark dealings that many associate it exclusively with the horrible crimes committed there throughout the decades. Harwood. Despite being one of the largest districts by land area in all of Liberty City, thanks to the area's scrapyard and large swaths of unused land, Harwood as a functional district of the city is very plain. The area is dominated by the aforementioned scrapyard and equally large city dump to the north, with very few businesses or even buildings on its mostly small side streets or larger avenues leading to other, busier parts of the city. Thanks to the lack of infrastructure, the views towards northern Liberty State are quite clear from many parts of the district, and the elevation varies considerably, covering nearly the entirety of the top half of Portland, sharing only a small portion of the island's northeastern corner with Portland Beach. The exact dividing line between Harwood and several of the districts on its southern border is a bit vague, with our own research concluding that the line was drawn directly along the upper edge of one of the roads running behind the Borgnine Taxi Building in the West End, and cutting directly through several blocks that many consider to be entirely part of Harwood. If this line is considered the true southern border to the district, it causes parts of buildings like the Portland Fire Station, the Amco gas station, and Capital Autos to be located in the neighboring St. Mark's district, though functionally, many consider this border arbitrary and instead draw the line to more closely reflect public opinion. Depending on where the line is drawn, the district consists of either three main avenues or two, one running east-west into the district from the nearby Hepburn Heights, one running north and west into the Porter Tunnel, and the other beginning at the Heights' northern border and running up and around to loop back into Harwood on the east side. There are also several smaller streets which circle around the Amco gas station and transition into dirt roads at both the scrapyard and the city dump. The rest of Harwood consists of hills of green grass by 2001 due to the presence of the Porter Tunnel project connecting Portland to the other islands of Liberty City. However, prior to the tunnel's completion between 1998 and 2001, the area would also feature one of the city's ferry terminals and at least one building for its administration. Being the northernmost district of Portland, Harwood borders only Hepburn Heights and St. Mark's to the south, and Portland Beach to the east. Harwood is a place with more history than seems likely for such an unassuming and quiet place. Perhaps owing to how little the average person thinks about, or at least used to think about Harwood, it served as the perfect place to commit crime and dispose of evidence for Liberty City's criminal underworld. In 1971, the area first became infamous for the Harwood Butcher incident, in which Forelli-made man Tommy Vercetti was led into an ambush by his employer Sonny Forelli, which instead ended in the death of the 11 Forelli soldiers sent to kill him, and a 15-year prison sentence for the surviving wise guy. In 1998, the area would become embroiled in the ferry union protests against the construction of the Porter Tunnel, which threatened the industry, and become one of the main protest locations for organizers attempting to stop the tunnel being built. Despite their best efforts, however, eventually the ferry terminal would be destroyed, and the company presumably put out of business when the tunnel was finally completed sometime before 2001. Also in '98, the area saw further bloodshed when Zendaco family turncoat Joseph Daniel J.D. O'Toole was executed by Leone soldier Mickey alongside future capital regime Tony Cipriani at the city's dump, in a betrayal which J.D. never anticipated, following his defection from his former allies. Tony Cipriani also used the junkyard's car crusher to destroy his boss at the time, Vincenzo Chile's car, in an act of revenge, in the first known instance of the crusher being used for criminal activity, and later picked up union boss Jane Hopper from the head radio HQ in the district, where he proceeded to take her on a roller coaster ride mostly around Harwood to terrify her into compliance. Also likely sometime in the late 90s, the infamous 8 Balls Auto Yard would be established by the eponymous bomb maker, who would go on to play a role in several violent incidents across the city's history, including the violent destruction of a freighter in Portland Harbor, using explosives manufactured in Harwood's Black Heart. More violence and chaos would plague the area when a mafia raid at the Amco gas station goes awry, and Tony Cipriani is forced to rescue Leone soldiers from an LCPD standoff. It isn't known if any police officers were killed during this incident, but many claim that that was the case. In 2001, the city's dump was used as a means of evidence disposal by the infamous Reaper Man Claude on at least 2 occasions. Once when destroying a vehicle owned by serial killer Marty Chunks, and again when disposing of a vehicle containing a body in the trunk for son of the Leone family Don, Joey.
Take the corpse to the crusher in Harwood, alright?
Few actual buildings have sprung up in Harwood over its history, but despite this, the area has been home to several businesses, both illicit and legitimate. Some of the businesses and other places of interest in the area between 1998 and 2001 are 8 Balls Auto Yard, Amco Gas Station, maybe, Borgnine Taxis, Capital Autos, maybe, Harwood Auto Crusher and Junkyard, Harwood Ferry Terminal, Harwood Fire Station, Harwood Train Yard, the Harbor Tunnel, Head Radio Headquarters, and the Porter Tunnel East Entrance. Harwood has no residential buildings whatsoever, and therefore is easily one of the lowest density neighborhoods in all of Liberty City, having little to no actual residents save the lone Leone associate 8 Ball and several homeless people who occupy the Harbor Tunnel. Alright guys, if you're a regular you know the drill. Time to drop character and take a look at some of the possible analogs for the scrappy semi-industrial district of Harwood in the real world. According to the Grand Theft Wiki, a possible inspiration for Harwood may be the Brooklyn neighborhoods of Williamsburg and East Williamsburg. Forgiving my stunning lack of worldly knowledge on places like New York, according to at least what I looked at, it seems that Williamsburg and not East Williamsburg is the more likely candidate for serving as the basis for Harwood, given Harwood's own lack of residential buildings and coastline, which both share, while East Williams consists of primarily residential or mixed zoning, while Harwood is exclusively commercial and industrial. Similar to the plain and underdeveloped Atlantic Keys on the opposite end of Portland, Harwood is a district which would hardly count as one if it existed in real life, barely qualifying as a distinctive area given how much it bleeds into and in some cases even intersects with neighboring districts to the south. Given this lack of detail in much of the district, it is hard to find a true real-world comparison, but given the placement of both and some surface-level shared qualities, Williamsburg seems as apt as possible when the possibilities are considered. Commerce, protests, and betrayals. Tonight we examine a district of Liberty City teeming with dirty deals and criminal history. A place that one may not immediately associate with crime and calamity, but whose place in the stories of many infamous Liberty City criminals is crucial. We will take a look at a district directly and indirectly tied to crime through the many liars, killers, and drug pushers who used its otherwise unassuming location to make deals and break legs. A district whose purpose and importance to the city it belonged to was matched only by the number of crimes committed within it. Portland Harbor. In terms of character, there isn't a ton to say about Portland's harbor district. As with any modern urban harbor, its design is fairly standardized, and features the expected assortment of warehouses, loading docks, shipping cranes and containers, as well as several large ships present at nearly all times, offloading or exporting goods from the city's main industries. Being close to Portland's industrial district in Trenton, it is a key area to the city's economy, both above and below board. Like many parts of Liberty City during the late 90s, the district in its current form is also relatively new, with renovations to existing warehouses taking place as late as 1998. It is dark, often foggy, due to the water nearby, and very open, with only one real road in the district which runs alongside the harbor's primary entrance. It borders Portland View and Trenton to the west, and small parts of Portland Beach and Atlantic Keys to the north and south, respectively. Similar to the Harwood district on the north side of Portland Island, the unassuming Portland docks have been home to many crimes over the decades, most likely due to its place as an otherwise unlikely place for such activity in the minds of average Flashback FM listening LC residents. In the late 1990s, the area was controlled partially by the Leone crime family, who moved drugs into the city from the ships arriving in the harbor. In 1998, Salvatore Leone would personally help organize strikes in the city, as he'd often done before, to help offload large quantities of drugs to sell on Leone turf. However, when the new union boss at the time, Jane Hopper, begins preventing the flow of merchandise, attempting to shake down the Leones, Salvatore would be forced to send his soon-to-be right-hand man, Tony Cipriani, to deal with the fiasco. Though Cipriani would try, unsuccessfully, to negotiate with Hopper, and later even try to disrupt the strikes using sex workers to lure the picketers away from their line, Hopper wouldn't budge. She would even continue to push Salvatore after Tony threatened the other union bosses working with her, and only finally capitulated when Tony personally took her on a joyride across much of Harwood to force her to end the strikes. That same year, the Leones would attempt another drug-related transaction at the harbor when Tony Cipriani attended a meeting with the Colombian cartel, serving as Leone liaison. The meet would be ambushed by government agents, and Tony would kill everyone involved, except for the future cartel second-in-command, Miguel, who barely survives the encounter. In 2000, the district would see another firefight when presumed Leone associate Mike began working with red light district bartender Johnny, and the two were ambushed by a group of thugs. Mike would, similar to Tony, kill all of the attackers, with only he and Johnny escaping the bloodshed. Just 1 year later, the area would see another murder when the Reaper man, Claude, killed a man for Leone associate Luigi Gottarelli, and then stole his car for compensation to the wise guy. He would also deliver stolen Securicars to a warehouse at the harbor that was presumably also owned by the Leones, though how often this occurred is unknown. Claude would also further add to the district's violent history when he discovered a meeting between the Colombian cartel and the Sex Club 7 bartender Curly Bob, revealing Leone's secrets to the cartel in exchange for drugs. After confirming Bob's betrayal, Claude would run him down for Salvatore Leone before planning the district's most infamous event. A ship docked at the harbor was being used as the main manufacturing center for the cartel's new drug Spank, and with help from his friend and associate 8-Ball, they would infiltrate the ship, plant explosives aboard, and destroy the vessel in a massive explosion heard all around Portland. The harbor was also the site of an oil spill around 2001 which caused the waters surrounding Liberty City to become so polluted that even swimming in it could be fatal. From an article in the Liberty Tree dated April 1, 2001, quote, "A government body said the recent oil spill in Liberty City Harbor would cause no lasting damage to Liberty City inhabitants as long as they don't swim or drink tap water. The oil spill, which environmental agencies claim is a direct result of the deregulation of the Liberty City Harbor Authority and the closing of the pilot's office, has led to a black film enveloping the harbor and occasional flash fires on the surface. The government official noted, 'These flash fires are harmless unless you get burnt, and are very reminiscent of the Irish phenomenon of the will-o'-the-wisp. It is a great treat for all Liberty's inhabitants to see such an ancient tradition being played out in our harbor. The oil spill will pose no immediate threat to humans unless they like swimming in oil, while any animal stupid enough to live in that harbor got what it deserved. This spill is nowhere near as serious as the pollution leak of 1988, so I don't know why people are complaining.'" Unlike the districts we have looked at so far, there are no businesses in the Portland Harbor so much as there are places where business is conducted. Some of the noteworthy locations or places of interest in the district are a tanker ship used by the Colombian cartel to manufacture Spank, a warehouse involved in the theft and possible chopping of several Securicar vans, and an illegal import-export garage. Okay, so usual shtick. Drop in character to examine the real-world inspiration for Portland Harbor, which if you've been paying attention should come as no shock to you. Portland Harbor is, according to the GTA Wiki and anybody who follows Rockstar's geometry logic, based on the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And while I'd like to say that it is obvious, in reality the uniformity of many harbors of a similar size in similar cities means it is probably inspired by the general American harbor aesthetic, with heavy influence from Brooklyn's own Navy Yard. The comparison is most obvious when examining the infrastructure of both, with the many shipping containers, cranes, and ports for vessels of all sizes. Unlike Portland Harbor, however, the real world is, some of you may not know, not actually restricted by early 2000s graphical limitations, and as such is much more active and less likely to contain ships docked for an indefinite period of time. Tonight we will be breaking the formula slightly to examine not one, but four, technically 5 districts of Portland, all of which are either small in size or in relevance to both crime and the history of Liberty City. As we wrap up our examination of Liberty City's seediest island and the home of the East Coast American Mafia, we will endeavor to cover everything we have thus far overlooked, as we prepare to cross the Callahan Bridge into Liberty's infamous Staunton Island districts. We will see murder, illegal deals, eccentric proclivities, and wealthy wise guys as we explore the oft-forgotten neighborhoods of Hepburn Heights, Callahan Point, Portland View, and Portland Beach. Our first stop tonight is very close to where we began this series in the Red Light District, in an adjacent neighborhood most known for its history of gang activity, Hepburn Heights. The Heights are a very simple area of northwestern Portland consisting of primarily just 2 large housing projects, with 5 total apartment blocks for low-income residents of Liberty City. A boardwalk of green grass and great views shared with the neighboring Red Light and Harwood districts, and a ridge/park on the district's east side, bordering St. Mark's. The district features 2 primary avenues on its east and western edges, with the western avenue splitting off near the border of Red Light District into 2 smaller roads which loop east back into the district, and 2 other main roads also both connecting to Red Light, with one also connecting to Harwood in the north. The district borders the Red Light District to the south, Harwood to the north, the river to the west, and St. Mark's to the east. Moving to the southwestern corner of Portland, we come to Callahan Point. Arguably the least developed district on the whole island and home to only 3 buildings, large amounts of vegetation or parkland, a seawall, and a single small dock for boats. Callahan Point is the definition of bare bones, with the skyscrapers of Staunton Island to the west dominating much of its skyline, and the rest of the area's view obstructed by the bridge named for the district, which runs over much of the neighborhood. The district consists of only one road going one way and running south, down under the Callahan Bridge, before turning up to slope back and connect with Atlantic Keys to the east. It borders Callahan Bridge and Chinatown to the north, Trenton and Atlantic Keys to the east, and the river to the west and south. Moving on to the opposite side of Portland, we arrive on the other contender for least developed district in Portland with Portland Beach. Consisting of only the famous Salvatore's Gentlemen's Club, mansion base of the Leone family, and a large empty coastline, as well as the infamous Portland Rock. Featuring sharp, steep declines and rough terrain throughout the area, Portland Beach is another district with very little going on, and is only remembered at all due to the presence of the Leone family headquarters there, and its scenic views of the Atlantic Ocean. The area technically has no roads whatsoever, but borders Portland View, St. Mark's, and Harwood to the east, Portland Harbor to the south, and the ocean to the west. And jumping to the very center of Portland, we arrive at Portland View, named as such for its central placement and hub of the city's main civic services. Being home to the Portland Police Department, the district is one of the few in the city to feature little crime over the decades, and mostly serves as the island's governmental heart, connecting more important parts of the city to each other. The area consists exclusively of residential and commercial zoning with only 2 primary roads, as well as a small section of a larger avenue coming from the west out of Chinatown. One road features the aforementioned police department building and the Sweeney General Hospital, while the other, completely disconnected from the rest of the district, serves as the access point for the area's other main attraction, the Supasave department store, before becoming Portland Harbor to the south. There is also a large empty grass lot or park on parts of the district's southern border with Trenton, with the district visible along much of its main stretch of road. It borders parts of Portland Beach and Portland Harbor to the east, St. Mark's to the north, Chinatown to the west, and Trenton to the south. Easily the district with the most history to speak of from tonight's selection, Hepburn Heights has long been the site of gang warfare and territorial disputes between the warring factions of Liberty City's criminal underworld. For most of the district's history, it was under the control of the Puerto Rican gang, the Diablos, led by El Burro, who sold drugs and possibly illegal pornography to the many disenfranchised and poverty-stricken residents of the district's low-income housing. Prior to being controlled by the Diablos, it is believed that the area was ruled by the Leone crime family out of St. Mark's, with ruthless efficiency, until an attempted coup in 1998, orchestrated by elements of the Sicilian Mafia, armed the Diablos to fight off the Leones in the district's bloodiest known conflict. Though the Leones would hold the district throughout 1998, by 2000 the area would fall under the domain of the Staunton Island-based Yakuza. At this time, there were numerous advertisements around the district for Kenji's Casino in Staunton's Torrington district, while the future building was still named Pachinko World, before being torched and rebranded soon after. It is unclear for how long the Yakuza held Hepburn, but just 1 year later in 2001, they would be pushed out by the Diablos, possibly for disputes between the two over unpaid protection money. Official Trenton Police Precinct logs from 2001 show just how quickly the Diablos rose to prominence in the area, with a leaked report describing the area as, quote, a territory dominated by Latin American street gangs. Until recently, the activity of these gangs was thought to be limited to minor narcotics offenses and petty car crime. New information suggests a powerful, if street-level gang emerging, based around the charismatic adult film star, El Burro. El Burro, who has been known to Liberty City Police for 4 years now, is a well-established criminal mastermind, a man without morals who thinks nothing of sharing his lustful ways with animals. He is a scourge on the morals of our nation. The street gang is believed to be called the Diablos. Several undercover agents have turned while investigating the gang, believed to have been lured into a sick world of vice, narcotics, and easy money. End quote. In 2001, the infamous Reaperman Claude would take on several jobs from El Burro by way of a payphone in the area, as well as collect one of Maidman Luigi Gottarelli's working girls, who may have lived in one of the apartment complexes in the area in some of Claude's first known work for the criminal underworld following his escape from prison. Second to the Heights, Callahan Point is also fairly well known for violent crime taking place in the area, likely more so than for any of its specific geographic characteristics. In 1998, the area housed a Leone family warehouse, which was burned down during a mafia war of the same year, and also that same year, Tony Cipriani, working independently, would follow and film the Chinatown-based butcher Giovanni Casa as he ran around the district's Riverside Park, attempting to explore his proclivities with a pair of frightened prostitutes. In 2000, at an undisclosed parking lot in the district, the area would see conspiracy and chaos when presumed Leone associate Vinny faked his own death with a violent explosion in an attempt to rid himself of obligations to his former partner in crime, Mike, another presumed Leone associate. The next year, in 2001, Claude the Reaperman would collect a car for Joey Leone containing the corpse of a Forelli family soldier, and possibly see further violence when it is assumed Claude murdered 2 of the remaining Forelli brothers who had been waiting in ambush while escaping with the body for disposal. When it comes to Portland Beach, it depends entirely on how much emphasis you place on Salvatore's Gentlemen's Club for how much history can be gleaned from the district. Given that it is technically the true site of the Leone family headquarters, almost all criminal activity attributable to the Leones over the years while under the leadership of Don Salvatore Leone could also be attributed to Portland Beach, given that Salvatore frequently gave out orders from his mansion in the area. If this connection is ignored, however, the only other notable event in Portland Beach's history was also tied to the Leones, when in 1998, the neighborhood's Portland Rock, just off of its eastern coast, served as the final battle in the 1998 Mafia Wars, which terrorized the entire city. It was here that Salvatore Leone and Tony Cipriani cornered and killed the Sicilian mobster Massino Torini and rescued Mayor Miles O'Donovan, which began the 3-year period of total Leone dominance in Portland. Finally, when looking at Portland View, there is very little criminal history to speak of at all. No major crimes are known to have taken place predominantly in the area, and throughout its history it has managed to avoid major controversies and scandals, common among other parts of Liberty City. This lack of infamy likely comes down to the fact that the area houses the Portland Police Department HQ, and is therefore heavily patrolled and monitored by the LCPD. Being exclusively residential, the only notable places of interest in Hepburn Heights are the 5 apartment buildings which define the district's personality, as well as the previously mentioned Riverside Promenade and the park on its eastern edge. Though sparsely populated with buildings, Callahan Point has had at least a few noteworthy businesses over the years, including the famous Greasy Joe's, a Leone family warehouse, the Turtlehead Fish Factory, and Rusty Brown's Ring Donuts. In addition to business in the area, it also has a jetty or dock, a public park, and at least one large building that is presumed residential. The only noteworthy places of interest in Portland Beach are Salvatore's Gentlemen's Club, Portland Rock, and the beach itself. And finally, Portland View features the most businesses or notable buildings out of all the districts we've looked at today, but few other important or noteworthy places of interest. Some of them include Classic Nails, Clench, Cocker Knockers, Dry Cleaning, Page 3 Bookstore, Signora Grande, Super Save, Tube, Sweeney General Hospital, the Portland Police Department, as well as the Portland View Park. Alright, time to drop character to look at the real-world inspirations for these districts, starting once again with Hepburn Heights, which is very evidently based on the many working-class neighborhoods of Brooklyn, New York, with similar urban design. Thanks again to the wonderful GTA Wiki for helpful insights. The most obvious analogs for Hepburn Heights are the similarly named Brooklyn Heights, Brownsville, and Queensbridge. The design of Hepburn's iconic tenement buildings is the clearest reason to draw this comparison, with this building design having been ripped almost directly from the real-world examples of low-income housing in Brooklyn and many other similarly urban American cities such as Detroit, Chicago, and various parts of the American Rust Belt. With Callahan Point, we already briefly touched on this area's primary inspiration in our episode on Atlantic Keys, that being Dumbo, New York, and parts of Fulton Ferry. Given that Atlantic Keys and Callahan Point border and complement one another, this is no surprise, with the real-world Dumbo, or Down Under Manhattan Bridge overpass, being far more industrial, but also featuring various sections of greenery like the park in Callahan Point's southwestern corner. The inspiration can be seen most evidently when actually standing under the Callahan and Brooklyn bridges, looking out onto the Staunton Island and Manhattan Island skylines respectively. Portland Beach is evidently based on some of the less populated parts of Brooklyn's south edge, most likely parts of Brighton Beach just east of Coney Island, with its longer exposed beaches and predominantly residential neighborhoods. Based on my own research, I also think that parts of it may be based on Breezy Point, Bell Harbor, Seaside, Rockaway Beach, and even Long Beach, in the far south of Brooklyn, which are similarly long stretches of land with mostly residential zoning and flat beaches, something which may not be reflected in Portland Beach simply due to the compressed and exaggerated geometry of fitting a New York-style city in an area smaller than Lower Manhattan. Finally, for Portland View, I had to do a bit of guesswork and extra research, not being a New Yorker or a particularly traveled man myself. My best guess is that the centrally located district could be based on the similar Park Slope, South Slope, Windsor Terrace, and Prospect Park neighborhoods, which feature mostly mixed zoning with low to middle income residential units. Another possible inspiration may be Sunset Park, but given the simplicity of Portland View and evidence that its consideration as a separate district at all may have come late in the development of GTA 3, as well as the fact that the real-world Brooklyn is far larger than all of 3D-era Liberty City put together, it's hard to say for certain. If you are a New Yorker, let me know how accurate you think my estimations have been, and if you think you know a better direct comparison for Portland View or any of the other districts we've examined today, let me know in the comments section down below. Mafia rule, cartel rule, and death on an unprecedented scale. Tonight we examine a district of Liberty City with history and tragedy for days. A place that was once teeming with life, Italian stereotypes, and historical infrastructure, which was the site of the most brutal massacre in Liberty City history, brought on by its associations with organized crime. We will follow the tragic story of a neighborhood which once served as a cultural landmark to the city it was a part of, which fell victim to the worst elements of gang warfare amidst the chaotic mafia wars of the late 90s, and its later role in further violence which has characterized the area ever since, Fort Staunton. Describing Fort Staunton as a district, like with most things related to the area, must be done by discussing its two most prominent forms, those being before and after its near total destruction in 1998, which we will cover later tonight. Before the explosions, Fort Staunton was an arguably typical but foundational Italian-American neighborhood, characterized by many of the same hallmark businesses and building types seen in Liberty's other predominantly Italian district, Portland's St. Mark's. With narrow streets crisscrossing in between the area's two larger avenues, and shops lining many of its streets, the old Fort Staunton was oftentimes claustrophobic, a fact that was not much helped by the constant presence of Italian wise guys who crowded or guarded many of the district's shops, which may or may not have been fronts for the Forelli crime family. On top of its many pizzerias and delis, Old Fort Staunton also featured several iconic Liberty City buildings, with a rich history of their own, including Ristorante E. Coli, the Fort Staunton Museum, and Fort Staunton Opera House, serving as landmarks and tourist attractions for the city. The district was also home to one of the many subway stations in Liberty City, allowing people from all across to easily visit its many eateries and theaters. However, ironically, this tether to the rest of the city would ultimately play a large role in the neighborhood's eventual tragedy. After the explosions, all of Fort Staunton's recognizable buildings were destroyed, including the Opera House and Museum, and the side streets adjoining its perimeter roads and avenues would all be demolished during the cleanup. The area would eventually be acquired by suspected front company for the Colombian cartel, the Panlantic Construction Corporation, and all of the land previously used for tenement buildings, shops, and landmarks would be rezoned for a commercial plaza, dominated by a single building which seemed to be aiming for the new tallest structure in Liberty City. Very little remained of even the old subway tunnels following the destruction, and despite the plans for redevelopment, the area never truly recovered. Both before and after the destruction, the district was characterized by two large avenues, one running north-south right through the center of Staunton Island, and another branching off of it to run northeast and southwest at an angle. Two smaller roads run parallel to the larger avenues to form a quadrilateral, which makes up the district's populated areas, while a larger avenue runs along its eastern edge and over a small body of water connected to the river, coming off of the inner-city freeway. Before the bombing, several smaller side streets crossed in between the district's main quad, but upon rezoning, all of the streets were demolished to make way for the future Staunton Plaza. The district borders Rockford to the north, Liberty Campus to the west, Newport and a small portion of Belleville Park to the south, and the river to the east. As we've alluded to already, the history of Fort Staunton is grim and plagued with violence, even more so than most districts of Liberty City. For years, the area was relatively peaceful under the control of the Forelli crime family, but by the late 1990s, war between the Forellis and their St. Mark's-based rivals, the Leone and Sindaco families, brought blood and bullets to the quiet Italian streets for the first time in presumably decades. In 1998, when elements of the Sicilian mob under Massimo Torrini orchestrated violence between the three Liberty City families, Fort Staunton would serve as one of the primary battlegrounds, at first between the Forellis and Sindacos, but later the Forellis and the Leones. Don Salvatore Leone would himself become caught in the middle of a battle between the Forelli and Sindaco soldiers while spying on them, and call upon Tony Cipriani to help fight their way out of the area to live another day. Cipriani would bring further bloodshed and destruction to the area both intentionally and unintentionally. First, when he burned down a building containing voting machines and killed numerous Forelli soldiers while attempting to secure victory for the Leone-backed candidate Donald Love in the mayoral election of that year. And again when attending an opera with Toshiko Kasen of the Yakuza in order to gain her favor and humiliate her husband Kazuki, which is attacked by Forelli soldiers, resulting in a shootout and hasty escape by Tony and Toshiko. And finally, at the height of the Mafia Wars, Fort Staunton, as the home of the Forelli crime family, was targeted by the Leones in the most devastating act of terrorism the city has ever seen. With help from bomb expert and Leone associate 8-Ball, Tony Cipriani would use an incompleted section of the city's subway line under the district to plant explosives at strategic locations all along the tunnels. Though largely unknown by the public until now, the initial plans to target Fort Staunton stemmed not from the Leones themselves, but from one of their allied politicians who had failed to secure the mayor's office in his recent election, Donald Love. When Love is bankrupted by the election loss, he concocts an elaborate, complicated scheme to facilitate regrowing his enormous fortune by securing construction contracts with the Colombian cartel front, the Panatlantic Construction Company. With one single act, thousands of people in the district would lose their lives nearly instantaneously, with many hundreds more in the coming days and weeks turning up amongst the missing. Though it would win them the war, had the Leones been exposed prior to their downfall for their role in destroying Fort Staunton, it's possible the entire city would have turned against them for good. But as things stand, the destruction would instead be blamed on a rumored munitions storage in the area, controlled by the Forellis, which, while a plausible excuse, was either a complete failure on the part of the investigation committee or a deliberate obfuscation ordered by Don Salvatore, who now owned Mayor Miles O'Donovan. Following the bombings, military personnel would patrol the district as investigations into the causes took place, which may have continued as late as 2000, during which time, oddly enough, the Portland-based Triad seemed to hold some limited influence over the neighborhood for whatever reasons. By 2001, the district would finally begin to see the fruits of Donald Love's scheming when plans for Staunton Plaza were finally underway. The new massive skyscraper would be nearly halfway completed by the time the district once again gained infamy for its continued association with violent crime and the criminals who commit it. Being tied directly to the interests of the Colombian cartel and being an asset of Donald Love, it would become the site of a meeting point between former lovers turned bitter enemies, Claude and Catalina, and later, following Catalina's escape, serve as a staging point for Yakuza leader Asuka Kasen, when Claude's attempts to find and kill Catalina spark a gang war between her organization and the cartel. Prior to 1998, Fort Staunton was home to many shops, restaurants, and important landmarks, some of which include Ballot Paper Factory, Bobella, Botilia, Clum Lapras, Market at Delhi, Fort Staunton Museum, Fort Staunton Opera House, Hotel Forte, Liquor Charlie's Bar and Grill, Page 3 Bookstore, Ristorante E. Coli, Signora Grande, and the Staunton Cafe. Following the destruction of the district in 1998, the only notable shops or places of interest were Capitali, Pizza, Steps Clothing Company, 1 Hour Photo, Metropolitan Catering, Market and Deli, albeit in a different location, and the Staunton Plaza construction site. Okay guys, time to quickly jump out of character and take a look at the real-world inspiration for the Fort Staunton district, prior to its destruction at the hands of Tony Cipriani. Most evidently, and thanks once again to the wonderful GTA Wiki, Old Fort Staunton was based off of the old Little Italy of Italian Harlem, and a little bit less so, the modern Little Italy of Manhattan. This can be seen pretty obviously when taking a look at the district's building design pre-destruction, with buildings like the Fort Staunton Opera House possibly being based on the Harlem Opera House, which started showing movies in the 1930s. Fort Staunton's narrow streets are also very reminiscent of the cozier parts of modern Little Italy, with many shops, often of Italian origin, along its smaller side streets, and residential apartments above them, much like the similarly inspired St. Mark's district, which we examined in episode 2. Given the relative simplicity of the district's design based on the renderware engine, which was, at the time of Liberty City's stories, already badly showing its age, it's hard to give any more direct comparisons of specific buildings, but the inspiration here is, again, like St. Mark's, worn right on its sleeve. Assassinations, gang wars, and cover-ups. Tonight we will examine a district of Liberty City's Staunton Island that is no stranger to violence. An otherwise unassuming neighborhood which has seen numerous thefts, murders, and conspiracies over the years thanks to its connection to several organized crime outfits and the always corrupted mayor's office. We will document the nitty-gritty goings-on of an area that has been connected to the Yakuza and Uptown Jottys, as well as both the Forelli and Leone crime families. A place so overshadowed by the many turf disputes and acts of brutality which took place there that one has to wonder how any average Liberty City resident continues to call it home. Newport. Like many districts of Staunton Island's downtown core, Newport is a highly developed area. It has an abundance of landmarks, both civilian and criminal, and also links many other neighborhoods of Liberty City together, with its critical transportation infrastructure. Along its eastern edge, the district contains a total of 3 ports for the docking of various seagoing vessels, while its western edge borders the city center and cuts through a shopping center that it shares with Belleville Park, as well as several other large residential and commercial buildings. Being the arrival point when traveling from nearby Portland Island, Newport is an important and densely populated area of the city, with many high-rise and low-rise apartment buildings, shops, offices, and large skyscrapers dotting its many streets and avenues. The city government is also seated in Newport, with City Hall in the district's southeastern corner. Also close to City Hall is one of 2 very important transportation lines, that being the expressway, which begins near the border with Torrington in the south, extending all the way to Fort Staunton in the north. Similarly, there is also a major thoroughfare running along the island's original coastline from before urban expansion, which also runs from Torrington to Fort Staunton and underneath the aforementioned expressway. There is also a major avenue which runs at an angle from the southwestern corner of the district all the way up to Fort Staunton and connects to the eastern avenue via 2 smaller streets, and another shorter avenue. One of these smaller streets also descends into a small residential wing directly adjacent to the ports. After some minor corrections to our last episode's Staunton Island district map, we can more confidently say the district borders parts of Liberty Campus and Fort Staunton to the north, Belleville Park to the east, Torrington to the south, and the river to the east. As we've alluded to, and like almost every district in the whole of Liberty City, Newport has seen its fair share of violence and criminal activity over the years, but most prominently during the late 1990s and early 2000s, when the city's gang and mafia activity were at their peak. In 1998, the neighborhood saw several violent incidents take place, such as when media mogul and aspiring politician at the time, Donald Love, was nearly killed by an attacking Forelli crime family hit squad near an alleyway close to the district's port. The attackers would all be killed by a man who has made many appearances in the history of Liberty City crime, Tony Cipriani, who had been helping Donald to secure victory in a mayoral election that year, one he would ultimately lose to current mayor Miles O'Donovan. Not far from where the assassination attempt took place, Tony Cipriani would also massacre even more Forelli family soldiers at the docks, while attempting to destroy evidence linking Donald to his own organization, the Leone crime family, which any savvy LC resident knows was also a failure, given that the Leone ties to Love and his campaign were discovered soon after, and ultimately played a large role in Mayor O'Donovan's victory. Further bloodshed would grace the district, and once again at the hands of Tony Cipriani, when the Wise Guy ambushed an FBI investigation on the Newport Expressway. Cipriani would presumably kill several FBI and LCPD officers in order to steal an FBI cruiser for use as a disguise, to catch and kill an informant planning to leak information about supposed doping in American sports stars. Being the home of City Hall, Newport was where the start of the chaotic battle which took place across the waterways of Liberty City in '98 began, and ultimately ended the Mafia Wars of the 1990s. Prior to the Mafia Wars, the district was heavily populated and controlled by the Forelli and Sindaco crime families, but due to actions taken by Tony Cipriani and corrupt LCPD detective Leon McCaffrey, it would eventually fall under the control of the uptown Jottys by 2000. That year, Jottys leader King Courtney would hire presumed Leone associate, Mike, to perform several jobs for him from his temporary base at the Newport docks, including winning a race against the Yakuza in the area with an F1 race car, and collecting several cans of Colombian coffee in order to disrupt the cartel's attempts to muscle in on the Yardie territory. Though the Yardies would, and presumably still do, maintain a strong presence in the area, the expansion of the Torrington-based Yakuza under Kenji Kasen also seems to have been a frequent source of gang fighting and indiscriminate violence by 2001, with Asuka Kasen, Kenji's sister, taking up residence in a condo along the district's eastern edge bordering the river. Prior to the Yakuza's conflict with the Colombian cartel, Asuka Kasen would live and operate out of the district, ordering murder and mayhem, mostly through former Leone operator and infamous Reaper man Claude, who would take on the job of killing Don Salvatore Leone, among many others, from Asuka's condo, after fleeing Portland under the threat of death himself. Claude would also steal numerous vehicles for both the Yakuza under Kenji Kasen and the Yardies under King Courtney, and deliver them to a garage behind the district's multi-story car park, not far away from a former safe house controlled by the Leone crime family, which was also mere feet away from an apartment owned by Leon McCaffrey, which Claude later set ablaze in a failed attempt on McCaffrey's life. Both before and after being betrayed by the Yardies leader King Courtney, Claude would also kill numerous Yardie gang members in the district for the Yakuza, first for Kenji Kasen and later for his sister Asuka, in attempts to sabotage a Yardie cartel partnership and later their drug distribution network. Finally, the area's multi-story car park was also the site of a brutal assassination carried out once again by Claude, but under the guise of a Colombian cartel ambush. Despite his ties to the Yakuza, it would be here that Claude murdered Kenji in order to spark a gang war between them and the Colombian cartel, for media mogul Donald Love, who sought to acquire cheap new real estate when the fighting drove down the area's land value. There are many shops, businesses, and noteworthy locations across Newport, including the Staunton Island branch of 8 Balls Autos, a criminal bomb-making enterprise disguised as an auto repair shop, Ammu-Nation, Asuka Kasen's condo, a Leone family safe house, Cafe Metropolitan, the Newport multi-story car park, City Hall, the Newport docks, Now, Outlet, Pay and Spray, and Zip Clothing. Alright guys, time to drop character and examine Newport's possible real-world counterparts. Without my usual initial lead from the GTA wikis, I had to do a bit of extra research to determine the best analogs for Newport in the real-world NYC. But if one remembers that Staunton Island is heavily based on New York's Manhattan Island, it becomes clearer where to start. Being the district that covers roughly the central eastern half of Staunton Island, the most obvious comparisons to make with the real-world New York City are the neighborhoods east of Central Park, such as Lenox Hill, the Upper East Side, and Carnegie Hall, as well as possibly parts of Yorkville. To me, the best of these comparisons comes from Lenox Hill and Carnegie Hall, with their similar zoning and building placement. Unlike Newport, however, none of these districts, or seemingly any part of eastern Manhattan, features a shoreline with ports or piers, like those seen in the game. This could be an indication that parts of Newport are also taken from the lower east side of Manhattan and Seaport, which would otherwise correspond more closely with the game's Torrington district based on geography alone. The long avenue along Newport's eastern edge also appears to have been directly inspired by FDR Drive, which runs along all Manhattan Island's eastern edge before terminating close to Battery Point in the southwest and becoming Harlem River Drive in the northeast. Fine dining, walks in the park, and mayoral assassinations. Tonight we will examine a district which not only encompasses its namesake shrine of greenery, but also many other important historical and criminal landmarks. A place where a mayor of Liberty City was murdered in cold blood, and many more acts of unspeakable mayhem were planned, which we will of course speak of here with no regrets. A peaceful oasis amidst the steel monuments of America's worst city, that in reality has seen just as much blood as the gang-filled streets of an East Los Santos borough in the 1990s, Belleville Park. Belleville Park consists of much more than just the park from which it draws its name, though the park itself does take up the majority of the district's land area. Surrounding it are a mixture of hotels, high-density and often high-income residential housing, and civic buildings. Along the district's southern border lies one of the city's primary municipal government buildings, officially dubbed the Town Hall, suggesting its origin as the original seat of government before the construction of the Newport City Hall. The building has presumably most often served as a courthouse ever since. In the north of the district lies more compact mixed zoning with many smaller shops lining the streets as the area bleeds into the Espatria neighborhood nearby. Dominating the district's western half are two large expressways, one which forms the beginning of the Shoreside Vale Lift Bridge, beginning to loop closer to the northern edge of the park, and another which begins at ground level in Espatria before crossing under the first expressway and emerging far to the south in Bedford Point. The park itself is the most notable area of the district, taking up the equivalent of several city blocks and hosting plenty of history to boot. The north of the park features a small pond, a restaurant/cabin, and a basketball court, while the southern half is dominated by a twisting footpath which crosses and loops around the many trees, rocks, and bushes. In the center of the park is a public bathroom, which might otherwise not be noteworthy if not for its association with at least two infamous criminals, which we will cover shortly, as well as the footbridge and a striking war memorial. The district borders Espatria and Liberty Campus to the north, Newport to the east, Bedford Point to the south, and the river to the west. As we've mentioned already, the history of Belleville Park is surprisingly red for such a green district. For most of its history, little of note in the criminal world took place in Belleville Park beyond the occasionally awful Liberty City Renaissance Fair, but starting in the late 1990s, chaos would seem to become almost synonymous with the district's name, following a horrific attack linked to the Mafia Wars. In 1998, Tony Cipriani of the Leone crime family would assassinate Mayor Roger C. Hull as he was on his daily jog through the park, as revenge for accusing Leone of being responsible for the recent escalating violence. That same year, Cipriani would also go on a mad rampage through the park, slaughtering at least 20 Farrelly family soldiers with just a katana. It's safe to say that after 98, the citizens of Liberty City became increasingly paranoid on their mid-morning walks with the dog. Not everyone appears to have been frightened by the attacks, though, as by 2000, the district's cabin was converted into a restaurant which regularly served members of the Colombian cartel, including its leader at the time, a man named Cisco. Hardly bothered by the power of the cartel, a presumed Leone associate named Mike that year assaulted Cisco in public, after killing several of his guards at the restaurant, only adding to the air of danger now beginning to surround the otherwise peaceful area. Not to be outdone by the likes of even Liberty City's most infamous terrorist, just 1 year later, after the restaurant was presumably closed, the notorious Reaper man Claude would several times add to the district's growing list of tragedies. He would first murder several FBI agents surveilling the Yakuza for Kenji and Asuka Kasen, two of which were stationed by the park's pond, and later take on jobs from the disgraced LCPD detective Ray Machowski from the park's public washroom. From the park, Ray would hire Claude to murder his former partner Leon McCaffrey, assist gunrunner Phil Cassidy in a fight against the Colombian cartel under new leadership since Cisco's death, destroy evidence of media mogul Donald Love's affinity for consuming dead flesh, murder Ray's current partner, and eventually help Ray himself to flee the city when his many underhanded deeds mark him for death. Finally, Claude would kill a cartel dealer in the park operating one of their espresso to-go stalls, that was in reality distributing the poisonous drug Spank to the addicted citizens of Liberty. Being a larger, historically significant, and relatively densely populated district of Staunton Island, there are many businesses, landmarks, and other places of interest in the area, including Hogs and Cogs, Papa's 12-inch, an unnamed restaurant, Cafe Metropolitan, Capitali, Fabric 8, Orbit Headquarters, Semi, Somers Real Estate, Twat Internet Cafe, Uncle BJ's Deli and Groceries, the Belleville Park War Memorial, the Belleville Park Fire Station, the Belleville Park Basketball Court, the Shoreside Lift Bridge, and of course, the park itself. Okay folks, dropping character, let's take a look at the real-world inspirations for Belleville Park, if it wasn't already painfully obvious. For those who are somehow completely ignorant of New York City, Belleville Park's most immediate and obvious analog is, of course, Central Park in Manhattan. Though comically small in comparison to the real world, Belleville Park's general layout and many of its prominent features are taken directly from the real-world Central Park. Thanks to the wonderful GTA Wiki for this insight, it appears the Belleville Park War Memorial is based on Cleopatra's Needle, which was actually one of two ancient Egyptian obelisks which were re-erected in New York and London, England, respectively. Beyond the park itself, the areas to the west, north, and south of the park, if drawn from their direct geographic equivalents, would be the Upper West Side, parts of West Harlem, as well as a few blocks south of 59th Street. The north of the district's relationship to Harlem can be seen pretty evidently in the building design and more narrow streets, while the skyscrapers and often tall residential buildings surrounding the park could be based on any number of real-world NYC buildings prominent on the west side of Manhattan's skyline in the early 2000s. Advertising, conspiracy, and occasional mayhem. Tonight we will examine a district of Liberty City known for its skyscrapers, its shops, and at least one massacre, as is unfortunately so common on this series. A place dominated by neon signage and historical landmarks that has seen its fair share of violence over the years, and has been home to one of Liberty's most infamous residents. A concrete jungle of a neighborhood with more Americanisms than you can shake a stick at, and a likely candidate for what one pictures when they think of Liberty City in general: Bedford Point. Bedford Point is about as urban comes as far as districts go. The only buildings in the area that aren't dozens of stories high are equally large cultural venues or government buildings, and the district's dense population reflects this. It is made up of 8 primary blocks, each with their own significance, and several smaller narrow blocks along the district's eastern edge and border with Torrington. Bedford Point distinguishes itself from its similar neighbor to the east by being less focused on big business and instead housing a more culturally refined portion of the population, being home to many of the city's museums and galleries on top of the iconic East Monroe Avenue. Amazingly, Bedford Point holds a distinguished title as one of the few districts in all of Liberty to not be controlled by any of the city's main gangs, although it should be noted that no part of the city was unscathed by this scourge. Many businesses in the area were in fact known to pay some form of protection to at least the Yakuza and likely many other gangs. The difference was, no gang members patrolled its busy streets. East Monroe Avenue runs directly through the center of the district with 3 major intersections and a connection to the main expressway surrounding much of Staunton Island. There are also 2 much narrower streets along its eastern edge which run parallel to each other and are connected by a series of smaller side streets. The district borders Belleville Park to the north, Torrington and parts of Newport to the east, and the river to the west and south. The history of Bedford Point, while not clean, is remarkably less violent than many other parts of the city. However, if you are at all familiar already with the history of America's worst city, you may know that this is hardly a ringing endorsement for its safety. Being tightly packed with people and more importantly police, the area has remained unpolluted by explicit gang warfare over its territory, though it has been home to several smaller, and some not so small incidents, which were directly adjacent to gang or mob conflicts. It has also been home on more than one occasion to massive criminal conspiracies, and as we will learn, was the home district of Liberty City's own, Donald Love. In 1998, a familiar face to any Liberty City historian would show up yet again when Tony Cipriani took on several jobs from Liberty Tree reporter Ned Berner, disguised as a Catholic priest. From the Liberty City Cathedral, Berner would trick Cipriani into stealing a report for him and a group of already stolen diamonds, as well as give Tony the order to cause mass chaos around the city using a fire truck and call for the murder of celebrities DBP, Black Lightman, and Faith W. Tony Cipriani was also responsible for 2 other known violent incidents in the district circa 1998. Once when working with corrupted LCPD detective Leon McCaffrey, in which the 2 men drove across much of Staunton Island shooting at members of the Forelli crime family, and again when Tony massacred scores of the Yakuza in order to secure an arms shipment that he delivered to Phil Cassidy in order to humiliate Yakuza Wakagashira, Kazuki Kasen. In 2000, the district would also see violence from presumed Leone associate Mike when he barged onto the set of a film starring Biff Rock and murdered several of his bodyguards, before selling the footage to the oddly amused filmmaker. The district was also apparently home to a single out-of-place mansion for a brief period in 2000 as well, owned by the Yakuza, second-in-command Asuka Kasen. The mansion was apparently torn down by 2001, and Asuka would move into a condo in Newport. Just 1 year later, following his failed election bid in '98, Donald Love would move his growing media conglomerate, Love Media, into a new building, and take up residence on the building's highest floor. He would even have a private garden constructed atop the building, from which he gave several orders to the infamous LC Reaperman, Claude. From the Love Media headquarters, Donald would send Claude to break a man out of the custody of the Colombian cartel, murder the Yakuza leader Kenji Kasen, collect several mysterious packages, and attack another group of Colombians seizing his property at the airport, defend a Securicar from cartel attack, and act as a decoy to lure the attacking Colombians away from the real target. Finally, Claude himself was also the victim of an assassination attempt in the district that same year, when, while working for the Jottys leader King Courtney, he was lured into an ambush at a parking lot in the district's southwest corner. Being one of the busier districts for civilians of Liberty City, especially the snobby upper-middle-class residents, Bedford Point is home to many shops, cultural landmarks, skyscrapers, and government buildings. The central blocks contain several large skyscrapers, including the unofficially named Bedford Point Tower, which was the formerly tallest building in Liberty City before it was ousted by the Jefferson Street Credit Union building during its extension in 1988. The most notable part of Bedford Point, and among the most recognizable parts of Liberty City or possibly any American city, is of course the famous East Monroe Avenue, and its juncture of two other major avenues. Along East Monroe are dozens of advertisements for every manner of American vice, proudly inviting people to listen to many of the city's radio stations and visit various businesses. On the edge of its western half, the district is home to the Liberty City Cathedral, which at one point also had an adjacent cemetery that was later demolished and covered up by the Bedford Point Opera House, built to replace the Fort Staunton Opera House, which was destroyed in the Mafia Wars of '98. It is also home to one of the city's subway terminals, connecting it to the rest of Liberty City via public transit and subsequently doubling its ability to attract customers for its businesses and patrons for its venues. Other notable venues in the district include the Bedford Point Art Gallery, Theater, and Courthouse. In addition to all of these places, Bedford Point is also home to many businesses, including Bank of Liberty, Birthday Suit, Bolt Burgers, Bruns, Fudge Eaters, Gourmet Deli, Hayaku Dojo, Joe's Pizza, King Nuts, Les Beans Cafe, Liberty Sex, Love Media Building, Magazine Shop, Mr. Ben's, Music Movies, Bill Cassidy's Fully Cocked Gun Shop, Pink Pussycat Boutique, Puns, Semi, Tarbrush Cafe, Trattoria Spaghetto, Twat Internet Cafe, Tube, Video, and White Line Airways. Okay guys, dropping character, let's look at the possible and obvious inspirations for Bedford Point in the real-world Manhattan. First, obviously, East Monroe Avenue is based on Times Square at the intersection of 44th Street, 7th Avenue, and Broadway. With its neon signs, similar layout, and similar building style, this particular inspiration is worn on its sleeve, but for other parts of the district, a bit more guesswork was required on my part. Due to the shrunken-down size of Staunton Island compared to Manhattan, Bedford Point ends up taking on the role of several other New York neighborhoods in similar geographically equivalent places, such as the Battery in the southwest, but also parts of Midtown Manhattan, including, oddly enough, parts of East Midtown, with the Liberty City Cathedral, I think, being based directly on the St. Patrick's Cathedral. I also think some of the more residential parts of the district could be based on anywhere from Chelsea, Greenwich Village, and maybe even Union Square. Then again, one has to remember just how much compression was being done to fit a Manhattan stand-in into a map smaller than most neighborhoods of the real-world New York. Big business, marital revenge, and political subterfuge. Tonight we will examine a district of Liberty City known publicly for its skyline more than anything else. We will visit the most dense sections of the urban jungle that is an American metropolis and peer between the branches to see murder, election tampering, and capitalistic caricatures of the most heinous variety. A place so jam-packed with skyscrapers and apartment blocks that it had surprisingly little room for the typical bloodshed present across the city, though unsurprisingly, it did not remain unscathed. Torrington. Torrington is a district made up almost exclusively of skyscrapers populated by mostly big businesses and politicians of Liberty City. Though it borders areas closer to shops and features at least one particularly striking building which stands out from the rest, there is little variety to speak of when cruising along its wide avenues under the loom of its many slabs of concrete and glass. The north of the district features the headquarters of the international conglomerate AMCO and the Torrington Police Department, while the east is dominated by the presence of a large casino, which has changed hands and names throughout the years, though always remained under the control of the Yakuza. The district's south and west ends are where the area's and the city's largest skyscrapers reside, with mixed zoning buildings dozens of stories high lining the streets, but almost no low-density commercial shops. A central avenue runs through the district north to south and becomes the Newport Expressway at one end, while terminating at the other end. Two large avenues and one smaller side street branch off of this main thoroughfare in the center of the district, while two loops form in the south and east, with the southern smaller loop becoming Bedford Point in the west, and the larger eastern loop joining together into a large avenue/expressway in Newport. The area has historically been heavily associated with the Yakuza, due in large part to their presence at the East End Casino and their soldiers, which have been known to patrol the streets fairly regularly over the years. The district borders Newport to the north, Bedford Point to the west, and the river to the east and south. While it's possible to argue that Torrington has seen significantly less violence than many other parts of Liberty City, it has certainly been no stranger to criminal activity, both overt and covert. In 1998, the infamous Tony Cipriani of the Portland-based Leone crime family would work alongside aspiring mayoral candidate and future media mogul Donald Love to try and secure his position as the next mayor of Liberty City. Tony would steal a corpse for Donald to use in an unconfirmed but suspected cannibalistic act, campaign around the district and beyond, spreading defamation of Donald Love's main rival in the race, Miles O'Donovan, and eventually, even more directly, violent acts. From the Jefferson Street Credit Union building still under construction, Donald would hire Tony to murder O'Donovan campaigners in and outside of the district, burn down a Forelli family-controlled factory containing voting machines being used by the O'Donovan campaign, and even flat-out steal ballots to try and rig the election in their favor. That same year, Tony would also further bloody his hands when he worked for Toshiko Kasen, the wife of Yakuza Wakagashira at the time, Kazuki Kasen. In an effort to embarrass and dethrone her husband, whom she harbored some bitter resentment for, Toshiko would hire Tony from her condo in the district to slowly whittle away at Yakuza assets, and set the stage for a dramatic showdown. She would have Tony steal a Yakuza arms shipment, destroy 3 Yakuza money drops before they could reach their destinations, and eventually confront Kazuki directly in a chaotic battle atop the Big Shot Casino, which ended in Tony slaughtering both Kazuki and all of his men. With Kazuki's death, the casino would briefly fall under new management, and take on the name Pachinko World by the year 2000. That year, presumed Leone associate Mike would, according to some, torch the casino when it refused to pay protection money to the Yakuza's second-in-command Asuka Kasen and a corrupt police officer. However, others claimed that the casino was not in fact directly attacked, and instead Mike simply killed the meddling police officer. Whatever the case, by 2001 the casino would once again be renamed, this time to Kenji's Casino after the Yakuza take control of the building once again, under the management of Asuka and Kazuki's brother and the new Wakagashira, Kenji Kasen. From the casino, Kenji would hire the infamous Reaper Man Claude to perform various jobs prior to Claude's betrayal, including assaulting the Torrington police station to break a high-ranking Yakuza out of prison, stealing 3 sports cars and delivering them to Kenji's lockup, ambushing a deal between the Colombian cartel and the Jottys and stealing their money, collecting 3 briefcases of protection money and killing several Diablo's gang members, and killing at least 8 Jottys gang members when they began encroaching on the Yakuza territory. There are not an excessive amount of noteworthy locations in Torrington. However, there are at least some worth taking a look at, including the tallest building in Liberty City history, the Jefferson Street Credit Union building, connected to the FBC Financial Group. One of the FBC main bank branches is also located in Torrington, as well as the AMCO International Headquarters building, the Morningstar Industries headquarters, and the head offices of both the FBI and the LCPD. Beyond these notable skyscrapers, the district features few landmarks. However, there is of course the infamous casino in the East End, which has changed hands numerous times over the years, while always remaining under the Yakuza sphere of influence. Okay guys, you know the drill. Let's drop the facade and look at the real-world inspirations for Torrington in the most obvious real-world analog for Liberty City, New York City. It seems fairly obvious to me that Torrington is based primarily off of Manhattan Island's financial district and civic center, as well as possibly parts of the Lower East Side. If you know anything about the development of GTA 3, you'll know that the game was heavily changed from its original version following the 9/11 attacks in September of 2001. However, it remains unclear if Liberty's tallest building, the Jefferson Street Credit Union building, was based off of any specific skyscraper on the New York skyline. So if you're a native New Yorker and you have a guess, let me know in the comments down below. The tall skyscrapers and tightly packed streets make the comparison for this one pretty obvious for the most part, although the limitations of the city's size at this time in video game history greatly reduced Torrington's ability to stand out, especially in a game where flying and seeing the world from above had not yet become the standard. If you want to know more about GTA 3's development and how it changed before release, go check out Badger Goodger's channel for some amazing behind-the-scenes looks at how Liberty City took shape. As much as I tried to find a direct analog for Kenji's Casino in early 2000s New York, I was unsuccessful, so where exactly the inspiration for its presence in the district came from is a mystery to me. As far as I could tell, the area Torrington most closely relates to in the real-life Manhattan doesn't even allow for casinos in the first place, so this could be an homage to a casino from elsewhere in the US, or possibly closer to home in the developer's home country of England. Tonight, once again, we will be breaking our regular format to examine the remaining districts of Staunton Island, which all feature comparatively little crime, infrastructure, and general noteworthiness next to the larger neighborhoods on the island. With tonight's conclusion to our examination of Liberty City's most iconic island, we will cover sports entertainment, healthcare, and post-secondary education, as well as the fruits of the Second Amendment. Though the areas we examine tonight may be small, they all still pack a mean criminal punch, and each has their share of stories that may shock your average CNT viewer to the core. We will see celebrity assaults, ambushes, and campus campaign massacres as we examine the districts of Espatria, Rockford, and Liberty Campus. Our first stop tonight is the northwesternmost district of Staunton Island, Espatria. Espatria is a place dominated almost exclusively by two major landmarks, the Liberty Memorial Stadium and Espatria Waterfront Park. Beyond these two most noteworthy locales in the area, the district also has one block of mixed commercial residential buildings and a large car park that services the stadium as well as the businesses in the area. The presence of both the stadium and the park make Espatria a fairly common tourist destination, with its views of the occasionally beautiful LC sunsets from the riverfront and long scenic drives to find parking for this week's game. One large avenue runs along the district's eastern edge and loops around the stadium to continue south back into Belleville Park. Two smaller side streets connect the large avenues with one additional side road splitting the two blocks apart. The district borders Liberty Campus and Rockford to its east, Belleville Park to its south, and the river to its north and west. Our next stop immediately east of Espatria is of course Rockford, which similarly to its neighbor is also dominated by a single large building that stands out from all other geographical features, Carson General Hospital. Being at the very northern tip of Staunton Island, much of Rockford, also like Espatria, is made up of coastline, with only a few noteworthy locations that have come and gone along the waterfront. The district contains only two roads and no roads which begin in the district itself, with one large avenue on its northern edge coming from Espatria and Fort Staunton, and a smaller road in front of Carson General which winds into the hospital parking lot and at one point had at least one additional business. The northernmost tip of the district once featured the Staunton Island Ferry Terminal, which would later be decommissioned and purchased by gunrunner Phil Cassidy to be made into an arms depot. The district borders Liberty Campus and Fort Staunton to the south, Espatria to the west, and the river to the north and the east. Our last stop tonight is the smallest district in all of Liberty City, that being of course Liberty Campus, home to the titular Liberty City Community College, otherwise known as St. Matthias University. The district itself only covers two city blocks, with the southern block apparently being a modern extension of the university grounds, containing a meteorology center, and the north block being the original site of the institution when it was first constructed. The district is the only of its kind on Staunton Island to be entirely landlocked, bordering Espatria to the west, Rockford to the north, Fort Staunton to the east, and parts of Newport and Belleville Park to the south. Crime in Espatria has for the most part been minimal over the years, at least in comparison to many other parts of Liberty City. However, as is the case with every district of the city, many crimes were directly planned in the district, and it's certainly no stranger to danger. In 1998, the infamous Tony Cipriani of the Leone crime family would work with corrupted LCPD detective Leon McCaffrey to undermine Leone enemies during the chaotic mafia wars of that year. From the eastern edge of the district's waterfront park, Leon and Tony would conspire to kill dozens of Sindaco family soldiers in a shootout across the island, lure a group of Jottys to their doom in the neighboring Rockford district, kill dozens of Forelli family soldiers in Belleville Park, aid in defending a group of uptown Jottys from attacking Sindaco soldiers, and destroy several Forelli family weapon trucks en route to their destinations. Tony would also directly commit violence in the district when he infiltrated a compound, then controlled by the Yakuza, to steal one of their Rhino tanks, in an effort to weaken their influence across the city. Tony would break into the compound disguised in a Yakuza car and slaughter dozens of Yakuza soldiers to retrieve and later destroy the tank. In 2000, presumed Leone associate Mike would take several jobs from the Colombian cartel's then leader, Cisco, who owned a mansion in the district at the time, which has since been demolished, presumably. From the mansion, Cisco would order Mike to deliver shoes with drugs stored in the heels, blow up a factory constructing surveillance equipment, and kidnap Yuka Kasen, the niece of Yakuza's second-in-command, Asuka Kasen. When later, Mike ironically began working for Asuka herself, he would also pay a visit to the stadium in the area to rough up a star quarterback for the Vice City Mambas, to ensure Yakuza winnings in their bets on games against the Liberty City Cox. Finally, in 2001, the district saw further bloodshed from the infamous Reaper Man Claude, when he infiltrated the same compound Tony Cipriani had raided 3 years earlier, now under control of the Colombian cartel, under a new leader, Claude's ex-girlfriend, Catalina. Just like Tony, Claude would break into the compound disguised to kill everyone inside, in order to rescue the mysterious Oriental gentleman who was a friend to Donald Love. In the neighboring Rockford, both Tony Cipriani and Claude would also once again contribute a fair share of violence to the district's criminal history. In 1998, Tony would, as we previously mentioned, work with Leon McCaffrey to set up an ambush with the uptown Jottys, to kill several Forelli family soldiers in the district. Tony would steal a Forelli family motorcycle and lure the Forellis to a lot near Carson General Hospital, where the Jottys and Tony massacred all of the pursuing wise guys. That same year, Tony would also steal a group of previously stolen diamonds from a group of armed men at the Rockford Ferry Terminal. Though Cipriani was unaware at the time, the supposed father of the church he'd been hired by to do the job was in reality Liberty Tree reporter Ned Berner, who Cipriani later killed for his deception. Tony also delivered a shipment to the district of stolen weapons that he lifted off of the Yakuza in Bedford Point to Phil Cassidy, who would later go on to set up shop at the site of the old ferry terminal. 3 years later, in 2001, Claude would be hired by corrupted LCPD officer Ray Machowski, who was also, coincidentally, the partner of Leon McCaffrey, to protect Phil at his new compound in the north of the district. Claude would also ambush a deal between the cartel and the Jottys taking place in the parking lot of Carson General, where he massacred all involved and delivered the spoils to Yakuza leader at the time, Kenji Kasen. Claude would even attack an ambulance leaving Carson General as it attempted to transport Leon McCaffrey to the LCPD headquarters in Torrington. Having failed to kill McCaffrey when he torched his apartment in Newport, most reports claimed that Claude finished the job in Rockford before the ambulance could get anywhere near its destination. Finally, the oft-overlooked Liberty campus was the site of at least one violent incident in the history of the city's criminal past. In 1998, Tony Cipriani would murder a group of Miles O'Donovan campaigners demonstrating on the campus grounds, in an attempt to secure victory for the Leone-backed candidate Donald Love, though his efforts would ultimately prove unsuccessful. He would also take orders from his boss, Salvatore Leone, from a payphone in the district to remote control the car of Sindaco family leader Paulie Sindaco during the Mafia Wars. In 2001, Claude would also take on several jobs from the uptown Jottys leader King Courtney, from a payphone located on the district's western edge. From the campus payphone, Courtney would hire Claude to prove himself in a checkpoint race, kill several Diablo's gang members, steal gang cars from several major gangs across the city, and collect a vehicle in Bedford Point, which ends up being an assassination attempt on Claude's life by King Courtney and Claude's ex-lover, Catalina. As we've mentioned previously, the main locations of interest in Espatria are the Liberty Memorial Stadium and Espatria Waterfront Park. There have also been a few small noteworthy businesses in the area over the years, including the Cock Lovers Official Fan Club in 1998 and Semi Clothing in 2001. The only notable places of interest in Rockford over the years have been the Carson General Hospital, the only hospital servicing Staunton Island residents, the Rockford Ferry Terminal, and later, the Porter Tunnel Staunton Island entrance, and finally, Phil Cassidy's Army Surplus Compound, built upon the site of the old ferry terminal after its decommissioning between 1998 and 2001. And as should go without saying, the only noteworthy location in Liberty campus is of course the Liberty Community College, or St. Matthias University. Alright everybody, you probably know how this goes by now. Let's drop the kayfabe and look at the real-world inspirations for these neighborhoods in New York City. Once again, thanks to the wonderful folks over at the GTA Wiki, I was able to get a starting point for each of the districts tonight, starting with Espatria's most obvious inspirations, which is Riverside Park and the Upper West Side. As is typical when examining the inspirations for 3D-era Liberty City, there is often not a lot to go on, but the presence of the waterfront park as well as Espatria's geographical location in the city suggests that these neighborhoods are likely sources of inspiration. The southern parts of the district, with the area's only businesses and homes, are likely based more on the Upper West Side, though given that there is only 2 blocks to speak of, and one of them is a parking lot, it really could just be about anywhere. As for Liberty Memorial Stadium, as a man who is far from a sports connoisseur, I really had no idea what stadium it was based on in real life beyond the obvious Yankee Stadium. However, there are clearly some sports lovers over on the GTA Wiki staff, as a dedicated poster pointed out that the stadium overall is based on Yankee Stadium, while the entrance is most similar to that of the LA Coliseum, the shape most similar to that of Harvard Stadium, and the interior most similar to Giants Stadium. So thanks for all that. A fun little fact I realized after 20 years of playing these games, by the way, is that Liberty City doesn't actually appear to have any American football teams based in the stadium, but instead, English football teams, the Liberty City Cocks and the Liberty City Beavers. How exactly GTA Advance's quarterback plays into this equation is unknown, but perhaps 3D-era GTA had some weird amalgamation of the two games into one global game of football. Rockford, according to the GTA Wiki, is mainly inspired by Inwood, Manhattan, and upon closer inspection myself, I have to agree. Given the sparse development, for New York anyway, and the overall feel of the neighborhood, it's pretty clear that Rockford was heavily derived from Inwood's waterfront, primarily, and Inwood Hill Park. It's also possible parts of Rockford are based on Washington Heights, mainly because of what I believe to be the possible inspiration for Carson General in the New York Presbyterian Hospital at the corner of Fort Washington Avenue and West 165th Street. Finally, Liberty Campus is based primarily on Morningside Heights and Columbia University, specifically with the St. Matthias University building being a pretty clear parody of Columbia University campus, based on the layout alone, which is reminiscent of the real-world school's 17th century roots, being the oldest institution of higher education in New York. Tourism, cartel violence, and betrayal. Tonight we will examine the one and only airport servicing the Liberty City area, which ironically claims the title of largest district in the city. We will see corporate and criminal conspiracy, and the end of a friendship fraught with grandiose lies, in our first sojourn onto the mainland of Liberty State. As we consult the tourists and locals alike, we will get a clearer picture of one of America's most important and most violent international travel venues, which brings a whole new meaning to the word terminal, Francis International Airport. Being unconventional as far as districts go, made up entirely of the airport and its related infrastructure, the neighborhood of Francis International is made up entirely of its namesake with no other shops, houses, or civic buildings beyond the one specifically for the airport itself. Crossing the shoreside lift bridge from Staunton Island coming west is a long expressway, where a single road branches off out in front of the main terminal building. This road terminates in the south at an entrance to the city's subway network, as well as a statue commemorating those who fought for freedom, 1936. Behind the main terminal to the west is the main air traffic control building and a series of smaller hangars for private and low-capacity planes. A single service road runs into the airport proper for employees and access to parking. This same road continues and loops into itself, though its use at this point is strictly prohibited to civilians. Finally, in the south of the district lies the 2 runways for planes arriving and departing from the worst city in America. From the city's official tourism board circa 2001, quote, "Liberty City's gateway to the world, where we meet new friends and prodigal sons." Francis International has proudly served all of Liberty City's transportation needs since 1953. For the executive traveler, relax in our business class lounge, or enjoy a pre-flight drink in Dodo's, our cocktail lounge. With hundreds of shops and services, Francis International is an airport to the stars. Hundreds of domestic and international destinations served, including London, San Andreas, Vice City, Miami, Bogota, Amsterdam, Bangkok, Toronto, Leith, and Tokyo. Fares starting as low as $69 each way. The district borders Pike Creek and Wichita Gardens to the north, and the ocean to its east, south, and west. The history of crime taking place in and around Francis International is quite extensive. In 1998, the airport had its first major incident when real estate mogul Avery Carrington was murdered by Leone-made man Tony Cipriani. Cipriani had been taking orders from Carrington's former mentor and recently failed mayoral candidate Donald Love, who had wound up living in squalor at a flophouse in Pike Creek after exhausting his fortunes on the election. Though sources vary on where exactly the assassination attempt took place, everyone agreed that it took place shortly after Carrington's departure from FIA. Back on the road to riches once again, that same year Donald Love would have Tony deliver the corpses of both Avery and Liberty Tree reporter Ned Berner to his private jet at one of the airport's hangars. Rumors suggest that Mr. Love ate both of them, though this remains unconfirmed by legitimate sources. When his dealings with the Panlantic Construction Company and the Colombian cartel land him in hot water shortly after, Donald would flee to shores unknown for a time, departing from FIA with great haste. In 2000, the airport would be the site of several murders and a criminal investigation. When presumed Leone associate Mike was attempting to track down whoever killed his best friend Vinny, another presumed Leone associate. Mike would meet with Colombian cartel leader at the time, Cisco, at his private jet parked on the airport tarmac. From Cisco's jet, the two would work to uncover the truth, but Mike would be too late to save Cisco, who was later murdered by the real killer just before Mike returned. Mike would hunt down Cisco's murderer and discover the man who had betrayed him had been Vinny all along, who faked his death in Portland. Mike would chase Vinny down and eventually kill him at the airport before setting his sights on his own freedom. After tying up loose ends, Mike would flee Liberty City via FIA and, according to rumor, move to Colombia to settle down, now a rich man. Just 1 year later, in 2001, the cartel would again find themselves involved in violence at the airport when they attempted to seize packages belonging to Donald Love from his private hangar. They would all be killed by the infamous Reaper man Claude, who also helped corrupt LCPD officer Ray Machowski flee by plane, killed at least one cartel dealer at the airport, and even shot down a small plane containing a shipment of the new drug Spank, using that most American of personal defense equipment, a bazooka. Okay guys, you know the drill. Let's drop character and look at what likely inspired Rockstar North when creating the 3D universe version of Francis International Airport. Unlike other districts we've done for this series, the inspiration for FIA is not nearly as easy to be sure about, but based on my own research, the most likely candidate, geographically, seems to be Newark Liberty International Airport in New Jersey. This seems further supported by the presence of signage in the game, calling the airport Liberty International Airport, though this could just be a coincidence. The actual layout and position of the airport relative to the city, however, is completely different from Newark. For starters, LIA actually connects almost directly to the adjacent docks along Newark Bay, whereas Shoreside Vale's industry is further north and not along the coast. Beyond these superficial similarities, both being airports, FIA might funnily enough be the most original neighborhood in the game, depending on one's perspective. The actual building used for the airport seems to be completely original, with inspirations from various designs around the country and world, but exactly what inspired the building's design specifically isn't clear. turf wars, urban blight, and scenic views. Tonight we will examine a district of the Liberty City mainland in Shoreside Vale that is known for its poverty and its crime and very little else. A place haunted by the specter of organized crime, whose streets continue to be patrolled to this day by armed thugs trying to desperately cling onto their tiny slice of American prosperity. We will witness meddling by the Italian mafia and the fracturing of a once dominant street gang into two petty warring factions, as we take a look at one of Liberty City's most neglected neighborhoods, Wichita Gardens. Entering the district from either the winding avenue descending from the north in Cedar Grove or the Porter Tunnel from Staunton Island, Wichita Gardens is a remarkably plain residential district with a population consisting of mostly low-income workers and families. The district is made up exclusively of large housing projects which rise into the sky like so many imposing monoliths with simple, cost-effective designs, both inside and out, resulting in the area's less than wealthy demographics. The area has two main project blocks, though effectively three, given that one is divided by a large overpass. The western block consists of only one building for residents, which is slightly more spacious than the other eastern block projects. These buildings, while smaller, are nestled closely together and split off into two separate sections, a north and southern subblock, intersected by one of the district's distinctive features, steep inclined roads. According to city documents, part of the district even technically extends to small parts of what many consider to be Pike Creek, but functionally, these areas are not administered by Wichita Gardens, as they only consist of a single road and a dirt path used by stunt jumpers. In the district's far east, though technically not considered part of the neighborhood officially, lies the Staunton View picnic area, a large open park allowing the weary-eyed residents of the district to take a load off, relax, and imagine what life must be like living across the river. A large avenue outlines the district on all sides but the north, connecting to the Porter Tunnel in the west, surrounding a small lake in the south, and entering into the residential zones along the east. Technically speaking, the district borders Cedar Grove to the north, Pike Creek to the west, Francis International Airport to the south, and the river to the east. Wichita Gardens, through most of its history, has been known for one thing and one thing only: gang fighting. For many years, the area was controlled and patrolled by the Forelli crime family, based out of Staunton Island. During the chaotic mafia wars that embroiled much of the city in 1998, the district would fall under the control of the Southside Hoods gang, a local outfit backed by the Portland-based Leone crime family. In 2000, the area witnessed a massacre when several different dealers working for the Staunton-based uptown Jottys were gunned down by presumed associates of the Leones, for unknown reasons. Beyond this incident, however, the Jottys don't appear to have had any influence in the area before or since. By 2001, the Hoods would fracture into two separate warring factions, the Red Jacks and the Purple Nines. When the Nines began working with the Colombian cartel in their effort to peddle the new drug Spank around the city, they would draw the ire of the Red Jacks leader D-Ice. D would employ the mysterious criminal contractor Claude to aid in hitting back against the Purple Nines, and eventually, Claude and D-Ice's brother would wipe out the Nines completely in a melee battle at the Staunton View picnic area. According to our sources, the area has remained under control of the Red Jacks ever since. So Wichita Gardens is one of the few locations whose inspiration is really easy to pinpoint, but thanks to the wonderful GTA Wiki, I was able to get a jumpstart on finding it. Very evidently, Wichita Gardens is based off of Co-op City in the Bronx, at least visually. It's worth noting that geographically, if directly comparing Liberty City to New York City, the geographic location of Co-op City in New York is different to Wichita Gardens' relationship to Staunton Island, being west of LC's Staunton Island, whilst the real Co-op City is northeast of Manhattan. The relatively low-income housing projects in large open areas make this one pretty easy to pin down, though it's also worth noting, likely many other similar housing projects around New York and other American cities played a big part in inspiring this district as well. Industry, poverty, and conspiracy. Tonight we will examine a district of Liberty City's mainland that has served as the backbone to the city's manufacturing sector and seen its fair share of violent criminals. We will explore a neighborhood often overlooked by the residents of Staunton Island and beyond, where the infamous Fort Staunton massacre was planned and where one of LC's most infamous residents resided temporarily during the chaotic years before the turn of the millennium. We will see criminal ambushes, international corporate conspiracy, and imprisoned mob bosses, as we take a look at one of the last remaining neighborhoods of Shoreside Vale, Pike Creek. Pike Creek is one of Liberty City's most vital industrial districts, according to some even more important than places like Trenton and Portland. Numerous factories, warehouses, and manufacturing centers for producing the city's exports and supporting its economy are here. Being one of only 4 districts in LC's Shoreside Vale, Pike Creek is a fairly large but important densely packed neighborhood, with only one entrance to the south via Francis International Airport and 2 more roads leading into the district from Cedar Grove to the northeast and Cochrane Dam directly north. Due to the varied elevation of Shoreside Vale, Pike Creek's elevation changes drastically from one end to the other, with sloped roads and inclines throughout the area, and encouraging reckless drivers to let out their speed demons in full force. A central avenue runs at an angle northwest to southeast, which eventually connects to the Shoreside Vale Arch Bridge. Technically speaking, the district's borders end in the north, cutting off one of the area's blocks and dividing it between Pike Creek and Cochrane Dam. Despite this overlap, however, effectively, the cutoff block is administered by the authorities of Pike Creek, similarly to the single road technically belonging to Wichita Gardens in the east. There is also a long road which descends from the district towards the Cochrane Dam Basin, which is also cut off as the district borders cross each other. The district borders Wichita Gardens to the east, Cochrane Dam to the north, Francis International Airport to the south, and the ocean to the west. Although Pike Creek has seen less violence within its own borders over the years than most Liberty City neighborhoods, the area more than makes up for it by being the location where infamous bomb maker, terrorist, and known associate of the Leone crime family, 8-Ball, planned and supplied Tony Cipriani with the explosives needed to level an entire district of Staunton Island. Speaking of the Leone family, the Fort Staunton massacre was believed to have been planned in secret by Leone family crime boss at the time, Salvatore Leone, during his brief stint in the district's jail. Posing as Leone's lawyer, Salvatore's right-hand muscle man, Tony Cipriani, would meet several times with his boss, as they planned their return to the top of the criminal heap in the city. By late 1998, Salvatore would eventually be found not guilty, and flee the district along with Tony to reclaim their mafia throne back in Portland. It was also in the late 90s, following a failed mayoral candidacy, that future media mogul Donald Love would reside temporarily, after going broke spending his fortune on the election. From the district's flophouse, Tony Cipriani would plan out the Fort Staunton massacre with Love in order to eliminate rival mafia family the Forellis and provide Donald with land for development, thanks to his new deal with the Colombian cartel-controlled Panlantic Construction Company. In 2000, the man behind the bomb, 8-Ball, would be badly injured at a cartel ambush in the district, which saw his hands burned, and ended in the terrorist arrest by the LCPD, where he was held at prison upstate for a year, before meeting another famous LC criminal in 2001, Claude. Being a densely packed industrial district with unique geography, there are plenty of businesses and places of interest in the area, including 8-Ball's Autos, the Pike Creek Police Station, Hope Medical College, the Punk Noodles Factory, formerly the Holy Reverend Joe's Flophouse, Pogo the Monkey Fan Club, Liberty Pharmaceuticals, the Burke Supply Company, formerly Scoper's Haulage, the Undercover Storage Company, the Turtlehead Fishing Company, formerly Clunt, Mr. Benz, and Pay and Spray. So, Pike Creek is, according to the incredibly useful GTA Wiki, based on the industrial districts of Elizabeth, New Jersey. Looking around the real-world neighborhood, it's not entirely obvious at first glance, but given the liberties, pun intended, taken when constructing GTA 3's neighborhoods, it's pretty obvious why certain features of Elizabeth weren't directly translated to Pike Creek, with the general feel of the area being the most important link between the two. Unlike Elizabeth, Pike Creek does not feature a large cargo container terminal, something reserved for the industrial districts of Portland Island instead. The change from the bright lights and busy streets of New York to the comparatively calm and predominantly poor neighborhoods of Elizabeth is a pretty accurate contrast, which Pike Creek and the various neighborhoods of Staunton Island reflect quite well. In tonight's episode, we will wrap up our examination of Liberty City in the early 2000s. We have been to the mob-patrolled streets of St. Mark's in the Red Light District on Portland, to the business centers of Bedford Point and Torrington on Staunton Island, and tonight we will look at 2 more unassuming neighborhoods on the edges of the city limits. Though one might think there was nothing to say about a typical American suburb and unremarkable hydroelectric dam, the bloody history of Liberty City has made these districts the stuff of local legends. Join us as we learn the truth about Shoreside Vale's Cedar Grove and the infamous Cochrane Dam just a stone's throw away. Cedar Grove is a district whose physical geography ironically matches its place in the city. Being a suburb consisting exclusively of large, multi-story McMansions, the district is home to some of the city, the state, and the country's most wealthy and narcissistic individuals, with a view to match their decadence, looking down upon the city they so proudly conquered. The only buildings in the Grove which are not residential are the Cedar Ridge Observatory, located on top of the namesake ridge, though access to the observatory is strictly prohibited to the public and cannot be reached by civilians, and a single warehouse in the district around the year 2000, which has since, presumably, been demolished. At both the northeastern and northwestern edges of the district, a tunnel connects to an expressway linking the city with the rest of upstate Liberty, with the western tunnel entrance also branching off towards tonight's other district of interest. Located in the northwestern corner of the Liberty City limits, Cochrane Dam is easily one of Shoreside Vale's most recognizable features. The dam itself is one of the largest hydroelectric power plants in the state and powers much of the city and the upstate Liberty area, using the energy harnessed by the containing water in the Cochrane Reservoir. The top of the dam serves as a civilian road connecting to the eastern and western halves of Shoreside Vale, and serving as a bridge between Pike Creek and Cedar Grove. At the base of the dam is a small loop of road, which runs southeast back into Pike Creek, but access to the inner walls or maintenance building are strictly off-limits to civilians. Cedar Grove borders Wichita Gardens to its south and the dam to its west, while Cochrane Dam itself only borders Pike Creek to its south, the river to its west, and of course Cedar Grove to its east. The history of Cedar Grove and Cochrane Dam are inextricably linked, as we will learn tonight. In 1998, during his rise to prominence as a businessman and media mogul, the infamous failed mayoral candidate Donald Love would take up residence at a mansion in Cedar Grove for a short time, where he lived in apparently complete isolation. In a complicated set of circumstances, Love would come under fire, literally, from the Colombian cartel, and be forced to flee the mansion and ultimately the city to buy himself enough time to strike back. 2 years later, in 2000, Uptown Yardie's leader King Courtney would operate briefly out of the district's warehouse, though it's unclear exactly where this building was. A massive shootout would take place at the building between Courtney and presumed Leone associate Mike, though both survived the encounter and it's believed the warehouse was soon after demolished. The next year, in 2001, Love would flee the city entirely after working with another infamous Liberty City resident, Claude, who wound up right back at the Love mansion when confronting his ex-girlfriend and now head of the cartel, Catalina, who had seized the mansion following Donald's departure. The details of what happened next are fuzzy, but according to witnesses, Claude chased Catalina all the way to Cochrane Dam, where a massive firefight erupted along the walls of the dam's inner courtyard. The fighting would conclude with Catalina's helicopter being shot down, and a death toll well into the dozens. Police would continue finding bodies for days following the massacre, and some sources even claim that among the dead was ex-wife to Salvatore Leone of the Leone crime family, Maria Latour. The district has also been known to be home to several other noteworthy residents, including the famous actor Black Lightman, and briefly, Tony Cipriani himself, who ironically would be the one to kill Lightman for Ned Burner, according to our sources. Thanks once again to the wonderful GTA Wiki for pointing me in the right direction. It seems as though Cedar Grove is likely based on parts of Jersey Shore, as well as the wealthy parts of Long Island and Westchester. Once again, given how small and simple parts of Liberty City are, and especially the underdeveloped Shoreside Vale, it's hard to say for sure exactly what the developers had in mind when designing Cedar Grove, but any of the wealthier suburbs of New Jersey and outer New York are likely candidates. Given the similarity in the naming convention, it seems probable that the Jersey Shore was the most direct inspiration for Cedar Grove, but the presence of the nearby Cochrane Dam doesn't make it any easier to pinpoint. In fact, Cochrane Dam's placement in general appears to be a bit of an anomaly/creative decision, since there are no large hydroelectric dams in New York City or New Jersey at all. There is a hydroelectric dam in nearby Niagara Falls, but Cochrane Dam is much bigger when proportions are considered, and the dam's design is completely different, with the in-game dam more closely resembling the famous Hoover Dam at the Colorado River, with its two large intake towers. Who knows why Rockstar decided to include this dam in the first place, but it seems to me that it may have been chosen to simply serve as a set piece for the final fight against Catalina and the cartel. As a small nod to one of their developers, the dam is named after Adam Cochrane, credited on the GTA 3 website back in 2001 in lore as being named after someone important named Mr. Cochrane. Thank you all so much for tuning into this marathon of GTA Geographies Season 1. Now that we've covered 3D-era Liberty City, it's time to move on to Vice City, so stay tuned for the debut of Season 2 next Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern, or see it right now along with every other new video I make by supporting me over at patreon.com/GuinnessWalker. Speaking of which, I really need your help. I want to continue doing shows like GTA Geographies and continue doing a criminal history into the future the way I want to, but to do that I really will need your support. For the roughly 10% of you who like all of my work and watch every video, this is your chance to not only help me do what I do without worrying about the copyright ghouls here on YouTube, but also shape the future of my shows by giving me the feedback that I need from the real fans. Now I've redone my Patreon recently to make it easier for all of you to support me if money is tight, because trust me, I know that problem all too well. For just $2 Canadian, which at the time of writing this is just $1.58 American a month, you can get early access to every video, downloadable versions of every video, access to all the music I make for the shows, and with permission to use them for your own work as long as it's credited, and access to patron-only sections of my Discord server where you can join in on movie and game nights with me every Friday night. And of course, your name in the credits of every video produced while you're pledged. I've created a Patreon goal which is roughly what I need in order to make the channel completely self-sufficient. So please guys, help me reach it as soon as possible to ensure this channel can sail prosperously into the uncertain future. I'm your host, Guinness Walker. You are all so awesome, and thank you so much for your support. Until next time.